You have a spirit. You have a soul. You're not just a body full of water and tissue walking around. You are a soul with a body. That is 100% true. And this video will prove it to you.
Once upon a time, it was common for people to speak of their own souls. And talk of their own souls went together with a sense that our souls were of great value, even immortal. But it seems we've lost touch with soul. So let's retrieve the ancient understanding. In the ancient world, the term soul was commonly used to signify the principle or source of life in a living thing. Soul was associated with the life breath, and the human soul, or rational soul, the human spirit, is different from the pure spirits precisely because our soul is the form of a human body. What does that mean? The soul is the form of the body. In the wisdom of Aristotle and Aquinas, the form of a thing accounts for several features of it. Form makes a thing to be what it is. So, the soul makes us to be a living human being. But a living human being is not just a soul. We are also bodies. We are made of matter. The soul forms or informs the matter to make it a human body.
The vast majority of people who've lost a limb can still feel it, not as a memory or vague shape, but in complete lifelike detail. They can flex their phantom fingers and sometimes even feel the chafe of a watch band or the throb of an ingrown toenail. And astonishingly enough, occasionally, even people born without a limb can feel a phantom.
Soul is the inner organizational plan of the whole body. Soul organizes, literally makes into organs, the matter that makes us up. Eyes, ears, lungs, heart, all of it.
James Peacock has suffered excruciating pain since he lost his hand 6 years ago.
A few days after I'd woke up, you know, it might have been a week to 8 or 9 days, something like that, before the pain really started getting bad, you know, to where it was like your hand is just crunched up real tight and stuff, or balled up, you know, and you can't move it. To unclench it, it's just, you can't. You've tried in your mind.
This raises a perplexing clinical problem. How do you treat pain in a body part that's missing? James tried everything, from painkillers to hypnotism, but nothing worked.
Until I found out about the mirror box.
So I said, well, why don't we put a mirror there and have James look inside the mirror? It's just as though you have visually resurrected the phantom limb. And of course, the patient knows it's an illusion, but it's very, very compelling.
Right now, as you look in there and you move your hand, your phantom does the same thing as your left hand is doing. First time I got in here and I've done this, and it was just like, it relieved the phantom pain, unclenched it. You know, it was just, oh, so intriguing, you know. Sometimes it's hard to explain how you felt, you know.
It feels like, it literally feels like you're moving your foot. Like, it feels like your foot is there. Like the reflection and, you know, just the way you move it and everything. It's nuts.
When the patient uses the mirror and looks into it and sees the reflected image of their intact hand or foot, they think that it is the amputated hand or foot returned.
For example, if a person had a habit of scratching the hand, and then the hand is cut off because of some reason, and after that the person still feels an itch and feels it very strongly. Now there is no hand to itch, but still the person feels the hand to itch. So now why this happens is something which is very difficult for modern science to explain. Now the modern science tries to explain this. By modern science I refer to modern materialistic or reductionistic science. So scientific materialists try to explain this in terms of the wiring of the brain.
And astonishingly enough, occasionally, even people born without a limb can feel a phantom.
But the point is that it doesn't happen in everyone. And if the brain wiring should be the cause, then it should be a uniform cause for everyone. But it happens still. So then the point here is, even if we talk about the wiring, that is just, you know, often there is no specific clear correlation to explain this.
Dr. Penfield was an American-born neurosurgeon at Montreal Neurological Institute, and he's also renowned as father of modern neurosurgery. He was an accomplished scientist as well as a clinical surgeon, and he made several contributions to our knowledge of cortical physiology. And the interesting part of the story is that he had started his brain research with the explicit intention of disproving the existence of soul. But after conducting experiments for 40 years, he came to an unambiguous conclusion that brain is a computer, but it is programmed by something outside of itself. In other words, he had started his career as a materialist, and he was convinced that mind was wholly a product of the brain. However, he finished his career as an emphatic dualist. Now I will talk about that experiment. In this experiment, he had a subject, and he told the subject to raise his hand. Now for this particular function of raising the hand, there is a corresponding area of the brain which gets activated when the person raises the hand. And then he asked the subject, what happened? He said, I raised my hand. Then doctor said, put your hand down. Then that part of the brain got deactivated. And then doctor again asked, what happened? Subject replied, I put my hand down. Now using external electrodes, Dr. Penfield activated that part of the brain. When that part of the brain was activated, the hand automatically went up. Then doctor asked the subject, what happened? Subject said, my hand went up. Doctor asked, did you raise the hand? Subject said, no, I did not. You raised my hand. Then doctor deactivated the electrodes. Then the hand automatically fell down. Then doctor again asked, what happened? Subject said, my hand fell down. Doctor asked, did you put your hand down? Subject said, no, I did not, you did it. So he did several experiments like this. Now the question arises that if Dr. Penfield activated and deactivated the brain in the second case, due to which hand of the subject went up and down, then who was the individual who activated and deactivated the brain in the first case? And we can clearly notice as Dr. Penfield was different from the subject and thereby different from the brain of the subject. Similarly, the subject himself is also different from the brain, because when the brain was activated by Dr. Penfield, subject immediately replied that I did not do it, and therefore we can infer that brain is merely an instrument used by someone who is outside of it.
Soul is the organizational pattern or form of all the parts, and all the parts of all the parts of our bodies. But the soul is not just a static or dead plan like the blueprints of a house. Soul is animating. The soul activates or energizes the many functions and operations of the body.
Phase lock 99%, link is stable.
Soul makes the heart not only to be, but to beat. Soul makes the eyes not only to be, but to see, and so forth, for all the operations of all the organs of our bodies.
Almost everyone who has had an arm or a leg amputated experienced the phenomenon of a phantom limb, which is a vivid sensation of that the missing limb is still present. Over time, these phantom limbs can become very painful and it's difficult to treat. Our results suggest that phantom-like sensations can easily be created in non-amputated individuals. In this experiment, the participant sits at a table with her right arm hidden behind the screen. To induce the illusion of having an invisible hand, the experimenter touches the participant's hidden hand with a small paintbrush, while simultaneously moving another paintbrush in mid-air in front of the participant in full view. The paintbrush is moving through the empty space in synchrony with and along the same trajectory as the paintbrush touching the real hand, matching the three-dimensional form of the hand as carefully as possible. And what we found is that most participants, after experiencing this situation for a while, starts referring the sensation of touch to the portion of empty space where they see a paintbrush moving, and experience having an invisible hand in this position. To demonstrate that this illusion actually worked, we threatened the participant's invisible hand with a knife and measured the changes in the sweating of the palm with 2 small electrodes attached to the participant's hand. And we observed that after having experienced the illusion, the participant's stress response was higher compared to when seeing the knife threat without experiencing the illusion. In one experiment, we also measured the brain activity of the participants using functional MRI. And we found that the experience of the illusion led to increased activity in areas of the brain, so-called multisensory areas, which are normally active when healthy individuals see their own hand being touched, which is a strong evidence that the illusion actually occurred. In future studies, we hope to be able to use this illusion to understand the phantom limb phenomenon and why phantom pain occur.
I'm going to train your brain to believe that this hand, this arm, is your arm. You see we've got this divider here? So right now you can kind of see your arm, you see the arm there. I'm going to cover over part of your arm. Now I'm doing that because your eyes talk to your brain. And your eyes tell you this is what's happening. So now, can you physically see your arm, your right arm here? No. Great. So I'm going to take these 2 classroom rulers. So we're going to train the sensations. You feel the rulers touching your hands because it's now becoming one with your mind. That this right hand is your right hand, right? You are believing that as I drag the ruler on your right hand there,
it totally
that it is
feels.
In fact, in your brain, your right hand.
It totally feels like my hand. That's crazy.
Feel the sensations line up with each finger.
What? Whoa, yo, this is crazy.
Yeah. So now if I just do like a little tap. Right?
Yeah.
Feel the knuckles. Feel each digit. Okay, this is where.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna do this one more time to train your brain.
Okay.
Right, so you feel your thumb.
Okay, yeah.
And your index finger. Middle finger.
This is nuts.
Your ring finger.
Oh my goodness.
And your pinky finger. And now you're gonna feel it when I tap it. You feel that?
Yeah.
And that. And
whoa.
That. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret.
Yeah.
I have not been using the other ruler.
What?
You feel that?
Yeah.
I am not using the ruler.
Whoa. What do you... I mean, it's crazy. It's not... Oh! Whoa,
You
it
felt
even
that,
like...
right?
Oh, no.
Now, check this out. We're going to do a little test. Now, again, this is all in your mind. I'm retraining your brain to feel sensations.
Okay.
But your brain is thinking that it's feeling it.
Okay.
So even if it gets a little, what would be considered painful, I will not be harming you because, of course, I'm not going to be actually hitting your right arm. But your brain really believes that this is, in fact, your right hand.
Oh,
right?
this is making me nervous.
All right, here we go. I'll start lightly. Feel that on the phone?
Whoa, yeah. Oh. Whoa. I'm totally feeling it in this hand. It feels...
Pinky.
It just... Oh. Wow, this is so strange.
You feel that?
Yeah. I want to move my hand, but it feels like I can't. What's that for?
Now again, I would never on purpose hurt you, right?
Okay.
And I would never take a hammer and bash your fingers to where they would hurt, right?
I'd hope not.
But again, your brain is going to tell you that you're going to feel this, when in fact I'm not actually going to be causing any damage to your hand, right?
Okay.
We'll start lightly again, okay?
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. Very lightly. Here we go.
Oh, it's so weird. Oof. Oh.
Oof.
Oh.
Oh, the infamous thumb when you're hammering. Oof. Missed the nail.
Oh, you know, it feels like an electric shock. It's so strange.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, even when I touch myself.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Watch this. Watch this. One last electric. Watch this. You ready for this one?
Okay.
Guess which finger I'm gonna hit.
Okay.
Guess which finger. See if you can tell me which one it is.
Middle.
Ah! Now again, I did not actually hurt you, did you? You didn't feel actual pain in your real hand. But for an instant, your brain told you that you were thinking that you felt a hammer hitting your hand.
My brain thought that this was my hand.
Everything is backwards now. Like out there is the true world, and in here is the dream.
Well, there's a lot of interest in the robotics community. How can we extend the human body? Not only with advanced prosthetic limbs for amputees, but maybe for exoskeletons. And then, of course, the question is, at what point do these external devices become part of your own body representation? At what point do you start to feel that this is really me?
Sitting in the lab with Henrik and Andreas, one of Henrik's postdocs, I'm about to be put through the rubber hand experiment.
And then put your arm here onto the table and inside this little box here.
Okay.
So cover your right side here now. Okay. So what I would do now, I will touch your index finger with the brush here, and please look to the index finger of the hand here.
Okay. With my hand hidden from view, Andreas starts to stroke my index finger and the index finger of the rubber hand in almost perfect synchrony.
What do you experience?
I think it is genuinely beginning to become hard to tell whether, yeah, I mean, it's beginning to feel like, yeah. Yeah, I'm buying it, that you're rubbing, that you're swiping that hand. Part of my brain is telling me that it's not possible that that's happening, you know? And then when you're not touching it, I go, no, not happening. And then you touch it. I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling it there. It's totally now just, it doesn't even, there's no question that that's my hand, that that's what you're touching.
All right.
That's the first experiment.
That's crazy. That's super crazy.
And when they connect my finger with the rubber hand's finger and introduce movement to the experiment, well, now the illusion gets totally surreal.
Oh my God, that's crazy. That's really weird. Oh man, that's nuts. there was a real moment where it suddenly switched. I was like, no, this isn't working. And then suddenly, now it's just, again, the more I'm doing it.
But that's the thing, now I'm not doing anything, now you do it.
That's crazy. I'm doing this. That's crazy. And it only gets more so as it goes on.
You have a new hand. Artificial
That's
hand.
amazing.
You can touch it.
Wow, if they can add a rubber hand to my body that easily, I can only imagine what they could do with a little more effort and planning.
I'm a psychiatrist. I worked at Spaulding Rehab Hospital in the pain management program for about 30 years. I have a long-standing interest in energy medicine and some of the healing modalities, which I learned about kind of before my brainwashing process was complete. So I've been traveling both tracks. And chronic pain allows you the opportunity, because patients are miserable, they're willing to try anything. So we've used a lot of these energy modalities over the years. And one situation in particular really caught my attention because it was very hard to explain by the standard medical model. It's phantom limb pain. So I'm going to be talking about that clinically and energetically. In some ways, the best way to start is actually with a brief 5-minute video clip. So let me just...
Let's meet the aptly named John Pickup, who after losing an arm, started a company which provides amputee stunt people for films.
I had a motorbike accident 20 years ago, my fault, basically, and I had the dead arm amputated.
One area I'm sort of really interested in is phantom limb pain, which I know you do suffer from.
Yeah.
Talk us through how that works.
It's all sorts of different pains, different levels of pain. Sometimes it feels like you just got your fingers like a pins and needle type feeling. And then there are other times when you've got like this incredible sharp pain. So you can actually feel the fingers and all sorts. You can actually still feel the hand, still feel the fingers. It feels like they're moving.
Well, I want to try something with you which I hope will be entirely comfortable, although it's related to that. What I'd like to do, if you're happy with me to, is just to draw around your prosthetic hand there. So if you can just turn it so it's palm up for me. I'm going to draw around just your arm and hand like this. If you could take the arm off for me. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to take part in a kind of imaginary game. First thing I'd like you to do is to imagine that your arm occupies that space. Just to help you do this, if you just close your eyes for me. And in this imaginary game, that right arm on the table is absolutely as sensitive and vibrant and alive as it ever was. And in the imaginary game, I'm going to touch you on one of the fingers. Obviously, it would be physiologically impossible for you to feel which one of those fingers I'm touching because there is literally nothing there at all. But instead of you thinking, well, I don't know, I want you to think, well, if I did know, which finger would I feel him touching? What I'm going to ask you to do, just so that everybody knows that you really aren't going to be able to see, and I again do ask you to keep your eyes closed, I'm just going to ask you to look off just to your left for me. Just turn your head to your left. That's great. And I'm just going to touch on one of the fingers now. So with your eyes closed, I promise you I won't move the finger. I'm going to keep it right where it is. Just take a moment. And just imagine a sensation being carried from the touch receptors in the dermis of the skin there. That message being carried along your spinal column and into your brain, where it's interpreted as a sensation of one of those fingers being touched. An imaginary sensation. I want you to tell me which finger I'm touching.
Is it the ring finger?
Open your eyes and have a look. I won't move a muscle. It's the ring finger. Okay, we're going to try it again.
Okay.
We're going to do it a little bit differently this time. So if you do the same thing for me, close your eyes and just look off to the side. Now I've got a box of objects here under the table, and I'm going to place an object onto the palm of that hand. Please keep your eyes closed. And I'm going to place it in the center of your hand, like that. Please don't peek. And I want you, as soon as you get any beginnings of a sensation there, weight or temperature or surface material, anything you like, just let me know what you get. First thing you sense gone.
Is it smooth?
Something smooth, okay. What about a shape? Okay, now I know when you shake your head, that's going to be you thinking, no, I can't do it. So think more in terms of, yes, I can do it. So it does become that imaginary game, almost like a role-playing game, playing the role of somebody who can feel something in that hand. So you said it's smooth.
Is it quite thin, quite long?
Okay.
It feels kind of like a plasticky kind of...
This is very interesting what you're saying. I kind of want you to have a look, but I want you to see if you can get any closer to identifying it.
Maybe something like a shoehorn or something.
Have a look. It's not bad. It's not a shoehorn, but do you want to do it again? Let's do it again. Okay, no, this is great. Let's do this one last time. Close your eyes for me. I'll change it for something else. Okay, it's there.
Something ceramic.
Ceramic? Okay, so you're getting like a cooler, harder, more solid surface. Shape? Just concentrate on the sensations from the hand.
Feels something like a cup.
Like a cup of some sort?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Like a teacup.
Okay, you can have a look if you like. It's a small smelling teacup.
I felt the kind of smoothness, the coldness that you get from ceramic when you first touch it. I'd actually managed to put my finger inside the cup. So I actually knew that it was hollow inside. So I was like, oh, it's very hard to kind of pick out the different types of sensations you're getting from weight, cold, smoothness, whatever. But you can kind of discern what it is. It's quite scary, to be honest, to actually feel something from a hand that hasn't been there for nearly 20 years. Nearly 20 years. It's very, very, very scary.
Well, the limitations of the biomedical model, because that says that everything originates in the brain and the nervous system, and if there's nothing out there, that couldn't happen. So I gave this presentation, a very similar presentation, just about a month ago at Harvard, at the medical school, where they have an institute to study research design for integrative medicine. And, you know, seemed like a good audience. I presented this same video to them, and here were some of their potential explanations. And you can see what the mentality is behind it. It's total, complete skepticism about the existence of any kind of energy. And, you know, these are possibilities that he might have peaked and they might have edited it out and he might have been told ahead of time. And, you know, all of these things could have happened that required an incredible amount of deception and ill will for that to happen. But, you know, this is where a lot of academic centers draw the line. And that's why, if it doesn't sound too warped, phantom pain is my favorite pain disorder because it really shows the limitations of the medical model. So let me focus in a little bit about the history of phantom pain. This is one of our typical patients at intake and in the clinic. Now, this is from a French military surgeon from 500 or 600 years ago. And, you know, we learn a lot from war, unfortunately, but his descriptions of amputation and sequelae are very accurate even nowadays. Ambroise Paré. In the American Civil War, Silas Mitchell was similarly a surgeon who did similar kind of documentation and helped us to understand the syndrome better. And it's been a part of our cultural history. Can you think of a famous patient with phantom pain, phantom limb pain? Who would you say is the most famous? I'm misleading you. The literary figure. Captain Ahab actually had phantom limb pain. And there are a couple of quotes from Moby Dick where he talks about it. And the first one, he's on the deck talking with the carpenter. And the carpenter said he's heard that a dismasted man, you know, using nautical terms, never loses the feeling, but it will still be pricking him at times. So the notion that there are unpleasant sensations even after the amputation has happened. So then Ahab proposes really an experiment that the carpenter takes his intact leg and places it where takes away his stump so that the two of them combine to make one distinct leg to the eye, yet two to the soul, because two people are having perceptions there. So where thou feelest tingling life, there, exactly there to a hair do I. It's a riddle. And really, that's the whole notion of how do we perceive things that are invisible. Just a more modern treatment of the situation is a movie based on a true story of a bicyclist who was injured in an automobile accident and lost his leg, and his life spiraled downward because he couldn't cycle anymore. He was eventually healed of his phantom limb pain, and there's a clue here in this picture about what the healing ingredient was, if you're good at reading body language. So yeah, he meets a girl and she falls in love with him unconditionally despite what happened to him, and healing happens. And that's a very important phrase, as I'll be talking about energy psychology in a bit and some of the trauma release therapies where that particular aspect of unconditional love is so crucial. So just a little bit about the story of it. It happens most commonly after post-amputation, but also even with spinal cord injury. And a majority of amputee patients will have a sensation that the limb is there. It's not always painful, but the numbers vary all over the place. It can affect any organ, anything that's been removed surgically, you can have phantoms of. And the pains are variable and extremely, extremely unpleasant. And unfortunately, medications and surgery and nerve ablations and things like that don't work very well. So here's a fairly recent quote that says basically most currently available treatments are ineffective. This is sort of a pictorial display of the different types of sensation. And you can see you wouldn't want any part of your body to feel that way. And the treatments have been aimed at every level of the neuroaxis of the spinal cord, all the way up to the brain, and yet still doesn't work. There's a lot of very interesting neurobiology that's been studied, especially with the notion of neuroplasticity. The model is that the phantom sensations are basically hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, constructed by the cortex as part of a reorganization. When you're not receiving direct sensations from there, the brain will rewire to accommodate. And they'll have fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging, to show differences in function after amputation. But really, it's, you know, this whole idea of functional neuroanatomy is not new to our tradition. So you recognize that's been around for a long time, where I'm actually blanking at the moment on what's it called? Phrenology, thank you. Yeah, that they had the same idea that different emotions are located, different bumps in the head rather than, okay, enough taking out my aggression on the Western medical model. So there are many integrative approaches to phantom pain, including the standard sort of mind-body approaches like biofeedback and hypnosis. There's an innovative approach that involves the eye movements while thinking about upsetting events that somehow or other helps to release upsetting emotions, and that's been very helpful with phantom pain. There's a mirror box therapy that is really fascinating. I don't have time to go into it, but it involves, for example, if one arm is missing, you set up a mirror opposite your intact arm so that it looks to you as though you have both arms and hands and fingers there. You move your intact hands, and it looks as though your missing hands are back and are working. And somehow or other, that is a very effective course of treatment. I'll talk about the energetics of it later, because this is proposed as part of the neuroplasticity model, that your brain rewires and can learn new ways of interpreting sensation. This takes a while, though. The rewiring process takes a while, yet you'll see some of these energy approaches are much too rapid to explain by that model. So going back to the model that I think is necessary in order to understand it, the energy field model. And it's part of our Western tradition. This is the Madonna, and you know, high spiritual beings are often portrayed with some kind of aura or nimbus, if you will. This is, it could be an energy field diagram. It's so exact. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the same idea of different layers to an overriding energy field, or a rainbow body, as they call it. In Islam, there's also the notion that people of high attainment also have corresponding luminosity. can't read this. The doctor is saying to his patient, he's scolding his patient. He's saying, "You've been fooling around with alternative medicines, haven't you?" And so there's a couple of points here. One is that your aura does expand with alternative medicine. And the other is that if a withered prune of a doctor like that can sense energy fields, then anybody can sense. And actually, there are some very simple demonstrations. I don't know if you're familiar with some of these therapeutic touch type approaches. Again, we don't have time to do a demonstration here, but that type of sensing that something is between your hands forms the basis for what I'm going to describe to you. And now that we have modern electronic equipment, people like the HeartMath folks and others are measuring that there is at least an electromagnetic type of field surrounding us. Whether that is the entirety of the energetics of the human field is not clear yet. A lot of this goes back to Franz Mesmer. Most people know him as a charlatan and a quack, but there's a very interesting backstory to him that he was very successful using his animal magnetism and his mesmeric passes to such an extent that he was threatening the conventional doctors of that time, and they called a royal commission, and they did a hatchet job on him. They did, some testing, but it was highly biased, and now, 200 years later, we're coming back to have another look at him. But the modern nursing practice of therapeutic touch is actually exact analog to his mesmeric passes. So without going into too much detail, I'll just say that I learned this technique and was using it in some of my patients. And basically, it involves feeling this sense that people often get of pressure or temperature or something. You assess first the field around the patient. So I was doing it with, I decided to do it with one particular patient because the normal treatment program wasn't particularly helpful. He was a guy in his mid-30s, had been very athletic, and had lost, I forget whether it was above or below the knee, in a crush injury at work. He worked on a loading dock. And after the surgical amputation, he was really hindered by the phantom pain and wasn't able to kind of get out of a rut and didn't respond well to most of the treatments that we did. So kind of out of desperation on my part, a little bit of curiosity, but it was more along the lines of, what the hell? I asked him, would you like to try this new treatment called therapeutic touch? And as I mentioned, they're willing to try anything. So he lay down on the table, he took off his prosthesis. I said, just close your eyes and relax. And I started, excuse me, by doing this assessment of his field. And I could feel the same pressure that we can feel in our hands, I felt on his body. And for some reason, I continued down even where his leg was missing. And much to my surprise, I could feel that same pressure sensation, down at his foot level, even though there was no flesh and blood for a couple of feet anyway. So that kind of made me react. But as interesting, if not more so, was the patient's response. He said, "What are you doing?" And he opened his eyes because his eyes had been closed. And I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I could feel you. I could feel your hand touching my phantom." So those two things were profoundly weird in a very positive sense because something happened. It wasn't, I suppose you could say it was, there's that term for shared delusional system, a folie à deux, that we had created some sort of something, but neither of us was expecting it or hoping it. And it was very, very palpable. I continued the smoothing out motion, and he described the pain flowing out a hole in the bottom of his foot. And I was very excited until he told me to stop. He asked me to stop, and I said, "Why? I thought it was helping you." And he said, "Well, it is making the pain go away, but that's a very uncomfortable feeling because without the pain, I won't have a leg." And he was psychologically not ready to accept fully that he was an amputee. So the pain was serving a very important existential function that overrode whatever physical discomfort he might have had. So in that was like a 20-minute session, and it literally took me 20 years to unpack all the things that happened in it. It was so rich. So, just to show you that therapeutic touch is not just a placebo effect. They've done studies with cells in culture, in vitro, to, fibroblasts are not known for having a strong placebo response to anything. So the fact that you can, and these are, there are a lot of studies along these lines now. Bill's stuff with cancer is in the same vein, that it's an animal model. So you take away a lot of the psychological variables that humans bring to the table. So this is just the summary of that case with Jim.
I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I have not been using the other ruler. What?
But I'm sure you're familiar with, there's been several rubber hand illusion studies. And one in particular I read was that when the person is experiencing that out of phase or discoincidence, where their hand is kind of mapping onto the rubber hand, that the actual physical temperature in their actual hand drops by about 1 degree or so, and which is a huge amount, right? Yeah, And so I think what's really interesting is that you know, we know this subjectively or anecdotally through out-of-body experience, that you know there's ways to get out of phase or discoincidence with the physical body without having to necessarily have the trauma. Ooh. So I think it'd be interesting even with a non severed limb case where you could actually see if you can photograph the rubber hand, or try to even have someone just try to produce something that's slightly out of discoincidence.
Phenomena generated at so many different levels. They all play a role. For example, with phantom limb, sometimes if the pain isn't there and there's the presence, over time it retracts and resorbs into the body, and there's no longer that sense there. And I'm sure that reflects some measurable change in the external.
On a few occasions, when part of a leaf has been cut off, a strange ghost afterimage appears. Researchers call it the phantom leaf effect, but no one knows yet what it means.
Hey everybody, my name's Jay and you are watching Plasma Channel. Today you're in for a historic gem. Science is a continually evolving process of finding truth, and for decades there's been a certain faction of science and scientists who have been dedicated to proving that both plants and humans have an aura. In particular, the good old 70s brought us the infamous phantom leaf experiment. It was controversial and the results were inconclusive, but one thing's for sure is I think I know how they did it.
Alrighty then.
What if I told you that plants have a biological field, and this biological field contains the blueprints for all of the physical information about that plant? You can cut a leaf in half, but that half of the leaf isn't actually gone. This is the basis of the phantom leaf experiment. Now, the method used to visualize this biological field of things such as plants is called Kirlian photography, which you might be familiar with if you watched my last video. But basically, Kirlian photography is a really groovy way of creating images or a video of any conductive object using high voltage corona. And make no mistake, it's absolutely gorgeous, but it's pure physics. So let's just hop right in and make the infamous phantom leaf. I've got 2 leaves to try, one from a vine and one from a tree, and they'll both get equal treatment.
Alrighty then.
So obviously the results aren't that great. I'm gonna give it one last try and cut the leaf in half lengthwise. If you haven't picked up on it by now, I'm trying to make a point. If you saw any of those quick phantom flashes in the previous clips, that is called a double exposure.
Alrighty then.
Double exposures are a photography trick which have existed since the mid-1800s. Basically, you overlay one photo or video on top of another, give them identical composition except for the object that you want double exposed, and bam, cool looking photo or video.
Alrighty then.
A great example of this double exposure technique is Tesla's famous Colorado Springs picture. He didn't actually sit that close to the operating Tesla coil. That was just a double exposed image. And don't get me wrong, Tesla's still a god, but the picture was doctored. And another example of a double exposure, as I mentioned earlier, is the phantom leaf experiment.
One of the inexplicable phenomena that a number of experimenters reported is the phantom effect. It has been repeated by many American investigators as well as investigators around the world. This ivy leaf reveals the typical corona discharge of its species. If a portion of a leaf is removed, a typical picture would appear this way. However, what occurs on occasion is a photograph of the portion that was removed. In this experiment, there is a piece of opaque plastic over the cut portion of the leaf indicating that this phantom cannot be escaping water vapor or gases from the uncut portion of the leaf. The image will even go through a barrier, a mystery.
At UCLA, Dr. Thelma Moss explores the strange world of Kirlian photography.
Let's say that there are about 6 different words that we can describe for this effect, depending on who you are. If you are a conventional physicist, you will call it a corona discharge. And that means it's an electrical emanation caused by the current and the voltage going through the object. Some people who are more inclined to the occult or to the mystical will call it an aura, and they will compare, for example, in famous paintings, whether it's of Buddha or Jesus or Mohammed or anywhere around the world, there are these auras that are circling around the head, and they would like to believe that what we are photographing with this electrical photography is a representation of that, something invisible to the eye, but which exists in and around the body. That's another word. Then if you want to be sort of non-committal, as I prefer to be, I would call it an emanation or some outpouring of an energetic thing. The Russians call this energetic thing by a technical name, bioplasma.
Her laboratory is a sealed, light-proof chamber where the mysterious force can actually be seen. Triggered by an electrical current, the flaming halos that burst from objects exposed to the Kirlian effect will be captured on high-speed film.
Okay, here's a very healthy and vigorous plant, and I'm going to take a leaf from it, and what I'm going to do here is cut off one good healthy section of it like that. And when I do, I'm going to place it on the glass electrode here so that you can see very clearly where the leaf has been cut. Is that good for you, Clark, for framing? Okay. Now, when we turn on the Kirlian apparatus, I think, hopefully, that we will see in outline the part of the leaf that has been cut away. We call that the phantom leaf effect.
And after a moment, it is there, the aura of the full leaf.
Skeptics have claimed that Kirlian auras are nothing more than fancy sparks.
But it's pure physics. It was controversial and the results were inconclusive, but it
until the startling phantom leaf experiment was performed by several independent investigators.
Ready to go?
A generating apparatus produces a controlled alternating current of 40,000 volts.
Make a longer spark?
Part of a still living leaf is cut away, and a Kirlian movie recorded.
Yeah.
In this case, with a video image intensifier. The faint electric field can be seen and recorded only in total darkness.
Lights off, okay. Bodice.
One would expect to see just the uncut part of the leaf, and that is usually the case. On rare occasions, however, the leaf seems to remember a ghost of the missing portion.
Even people born without a limb can feel a phantom.
Evidence for the first time that the physical body is not all there is to life. Alan Dietrich has a worldwide reputation for his phantom leaf ability. John Hubacher comments.
One of the problems with Kirlian photography and the phantom leaves is that work that we had done at UCLA and the work that we had heard about done in other countries, notably Russia, was that the experiment was not reproducible. This means that we would take phantoms, and at UCLA, for instance, we would get phantoms 1%, 2% of the time. They were very difficult to get. Alan had fabulous phantom leaves. He presented these at this New York conference, and he was getting them, how many say, 90% of the time? 95? This is a tremendous result, and so we were all very excited about his ability to generate these phantom leaves.
The first time I did it, nobody ever said I couldn't do it, so I just went down and tried it. And I got it the very first time I tried it, so I've been working with it ever since. I haven't changed anything. So.
It seems that it may actually be Alan himself that can produce the effect, and this is typical with many types of experiments in parapsychology where the experimenter himself interacts with the experiment quite intimately.
The movie apparatus would not produce a complete phantom. Alan Dietrich continued all night with still film. Here are two of his successes. In each case, half a leaf produced a complete image.
Now, I'm not attacking those who believe that plants or humans have an aura. I'm just saying that Kirlian photography does not reveal some hidden biological field contained within a plant.
In 1939, Russian scientist Semyon Kirlian accidentally discovered that if an object on a photographic plate is subjected to a strong enough electrical charge, an image is created on the plate. By photographing the coronal discharge that occurs between an electrically grounded object and the electrode generating the field, the sparks captured on film show multicolored, multi-frequency energy waves ranging from below infrared to above ultraviolet. These images have since become known as Kirlian photography, or biofield electrography. Kirlian photography has now been studied and tested extensively in many reputable laboratories around the world, and has shown consistent color, shape, and frequency correlations with various emotional and physical states. For example, UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute's Dr. Thelma Moss has recorded consistent patterns correlating fingertip coronas with specific emotions. Healthy, happy, relaxed subjects regularly exhibit quarter-inch wide blue and white coronas, while stressed, anxious, or nervous subjects consistently exhibit blotchy red coronas. In another study, she found that when photographed together, close friends generate brighter and more convergent coronas than strangers. Being photographed with strict authority figures produces smaller coronas, while being photographed with unassuming, unintimidating people produces larger coronas. When two people place their fingers on the same film, both images always come out clearly, but if they look into each other's eyes while the photo is taken, one of the fingerprints is blanked out and disappears. Dr. Moss's strange findings sparked interest at the U.S. Heuristic Institute, where they performed their own Kirlian biofield experiments with intimate couples. When partners were instructed to place their fingers on the film and focus unpleasant, unloving thoughts towards one another, their coronal patterns did not merge at all. When the couples focused pleasant, loving thoughts towards one another, their patterns began to merge. And when they kissed each other during the photographs, their coronal boundaries dissolved into one. Some people were even able to withhold their coronas by tensing all the muscles in their bodies. In experiments with Dr. J.L. Hickman, psychic Uri Geller was able to consciously direct the shape of his fingertip coronas, making circles, squares, straight lines, and triangles at will. The International Kirlian Research Association released that the German magazine Esoterra describes an interpersonal study conducted with Kirlian photography. Two individuals in a psychiatrist's office were asked to put their fingers next to each other and take a picture. They were asked to return once a week for 3 weeks. The Kirlian photos revealed the man to be very attracted to this woman, large, expansive corona in her direction. But her corona discharge indicated that she did not feel an attraction towards him, small, tight corona. The second week revealed the man to be extremely persistent, and it looked as if she might be more responsive, slightly converging coronas. The third week shows two bright, happy coronas blending, and we are told that they are living happily ever after. Dr. Moss also conducted experiments showing that cancerous tissue is easily distinguished from healthy tissue using Kirlian imaging. In one study, she was able to separate 100 healthy control rats from 100 other rats injected with cancer simply by the dramatic difference in corona emanations. Romanian Dr. Lon Dumitrescu also used Kirlian imaging to detect cancer tissue. He screened 6,000 industrial workers for cancer and found 47 malignant tumors, while conventional doctors found only 41. By analyzing the coronal discharge channels, their geometry, color, and energetics, he was able to detect cancer better than traditional imaging and laboratory tests. Various studies involving plant coronas have gleaned interesting information as well. For example, the viability of seeds can be determined by Kirlian images, since fertile seeds show much larger coronal ejections than dead seeds. Healthy seeds have a deep blue aura, and as the root tips sprout, they show up pinkish red, indicating where the most active growth is taking place. Researchers also found that dew forms on plant leaves in exactly the same locations as maximum flare patterns. They found that male plant stamens always come out blue, while the female ovary photographs are always gold. And most impressively, when a leaf is torn in half, then photographed, the outline of the entire leaf is still clearly visible in its discharge pattern. Eric Pepin wrote, "Physical evidence of the energy body exists, and a number of different sources document it. The first of these is Russian engineer Semya Kirlian, who discovered that living tissue emits electromagnetic force fields that show up on photosensitive paper. Using his photographic technique, a leaf with a portion of it cut out still shows the outline of its missing part. Even though it is not there physically, the photograph shows an outline as if it was. This prompts suggestions that Kirlian photography reveals the energy body. Kirlian photographs show energy emanating from the body. A picture of a hand, for example, depicts the fingers illuminated by energy. If two people touch fingertips, the energy appears to fight until both people accept the presence of the other. Another interesting case involves people who have amputated feet and legs. These people frequently report intense pain originating from phantom limbs. When a person places their hand on the area of pain, where the missing limb would be, and massages it as if there was a hand or limb there, the pain stops. At the point of death, the human body inexplicably loses several ounces of weight. Studies have also shown that when photographed with light-sensitive film, for an amount of nanoseconds, less than a second, a large illumination expands from the body and disappears upon death. These examples all point toward the conclusion that a separate body or being composed of energy inhabits the physical human body. The bioelectric fields captured by Kirlian photographs are postulated by many to be an expression of the aura, representing our chi life force energy. Psychics, mystics, and shamans the world over in traditions including Christian, Chinese, Japanese, Egyptian, and Tibetan have all talked about being able to see a faint multicolored corona or halo around people's physical bodies and heads. This aura emanates from the energy body, which exists within and permeates the physical body. Healthy, positive, and spiritual people are said to have glowing white gold auras, while unhealthy, negative, or immoral people have more subdued, darker color auras. Each person's aura is said to be unique, but constantly changing based on thoughts, mood, disease, environment, and other factors. Experiments with Kirlian photographs and bioelectrography have proved very consistent with ancient definitions of the aura. Michael Talbot wrote, "One mystical phenomenon that appears to involve the ability to see reality's frequency aspects is the aura, or human energy field. The notion that there is a subtle field of energy around the human body, a halo-like envelope of light that exists just beyond normal human perception, can be found in many ancient traditions. In India, sacred writings that date back over 5,000 years refer to this life energy as prana. In China, since the 3rd millennium BC, it has been called qi, and is believed to be the energy that flows through the acupuncture meridian system. Kabbalah, a Jewish mystical philosophy that arose in the 6th century BC, calls this vital principle nephesh and teaches that an egg-shaped bubble of iridescence surrounds every human body. In their book Future Science, writer John White and parapsychologist Stanley Krippner list 97 different cultures that refer to the aura with 97 different names. Adrian Cooper wrote, "The aura is also an extremely accurate indicator of spiritual attainment. Highly spiritual, evolved people will be instantly recognizable by a vivid, clean, dynamic aura, the most prominent feature of which is an intense, bright golden yellow area extending from and around the crown of the head. Sometimes the aura can be so intense it can even be viewed by people not usually possessing the ability of auric vision. It is also this intense golden aura around the head of highly spiritual people that gives rise to the so-called halo, as often, for example, depicted around the head of Jesus or a saint. Skeptics claim that Kirlian photography is merely capturing variances in pressure, humidity, temperature, voltage, etc., and not some mystical aura. It is true that New Age fairs and internet sites sell aura cameras, often marketing them as Kirlian cameras. These are indeed misleading and serve no practical purpose beyond that of a mood ring. However, electrophysiological studies have shown that corona emanation of true Kirlian photographs does not relate to temperature, perspiration, galvanic skin response, vasoconstrictions, or dilations. While it may be easy for some to discount 97 traditions around the world and their descriptions of the aura, it is much harder to discount Dr. Moss and Dr. Dumitrescu's amazing work with cancer detection, or the Heuristic Institute's results involving couples. Dr. Edward Condrit wrote, "The greatest advance in the utilization of Kirlian photography was made by the efforts of the German doctor Peter Mandel, who was trained as an acupuncturist. He observed that by treating disease states with acupuncture points, the corresponding deficiencies in the Kirlian photograph would change. After years of research, Dr. Mandel has developed a diagnostic and treatment program based on Kirlian analysis. Disease states are caused by energy blockages. The Kirlian photograph helps to determine the overall energy flow of the body and locations of energy blockage, which are manifested in the disease state. Dr. Mandel has categorized types of energy patterns on the Kirlian into endocrine, toxic, and degenerative. Endocrine is the pre-disease state. The patient has symptoms, but there is no discernible pathology. The Kirlian can be extremely valuable in locating the area of blockage. The second type of disturbance in the energy pattern is the toxic state. This is when tissue changes develop, such as inflammation, congestion, and blockages of energy flow in the body. The third type is the degenerative type, where the body begins to show destructive tissue changes.
Years ago, I had one of the big early programs to electrically stimulate paraplegics to stand and walk. And of course, they had no motor function, and they had very little or zero sensory function because the amount of electrical energy used for an able-bodied person could never stand the pain. But I required them to have proprioception. Meaning, proprioception, they had to know in space where their limbs were. It was an open loop program, so that to be successful, they had to know where their limbs were in space.
These are spinal cord injured patients?
Yes, okay. Spinal cord injured paraplegics. Okay. And a number of patients, I never rejected a person. They all had proprioception, even though they didn't have, I know they didn't have little sensory because they couldn't stand the pain. Has anybody looked at, I just thought, well, it must be some separate nerve path that they didn't have, but what your work suggests that there may be something else that gives them the proprioception clue.
I think that's an energetic sensation that they're experiencing. And the example that comes to mind is there's a yoga instructor from Minnesota who himself is paraplegic and got into yoga as part of his recovery process. He's still paralyzed, but he's developed such fine sensitivity to what goes on that he feels this sense of presence, he calls it. He feels presence in the rest of his body. So that's what he trains his patients to do, is to feel and be with their body so that it's not just, dragging along a chunk of wood kind of thing. And so it's exactly that proprioceptive sense. So I think that's energetic rather than neurologic.
Eric, quickly, it dawned on me in seeing some of your imagery of beliefs and stuff, there was a guy, George Deloire, who did some pictures, I think radionic pictures. I can't quite remember how it was, but what struck me is when the pictures were best focused, it was a time thing. So if you imagine just like tuning a lens, and I forget exactly what the point was, but that there was a moment in time when it was most in focus, and the other images, when they weren't synchronized with time correctly, were just more out of focus, but they were not non-existent.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of variables involved, and that's why, for example, the phantom leaf effect, it depends on the photographer. Some people had a knack for getting those images and others couldn't. One theory is that it's an interactive process, that it's not just a leaf there and an operator here, that if there's an energetic connection, it sort of activates the leaf to show its field more directly. So it might have been the same with the radionics situation.
Now at the University of California at Los Angeles, a laboratory exists where researchers are attempting to capture this human energy on film. The process is called Kirlian photography, named after Seymour and Valentina Kirlian, Russian scientists who pioneered it in the 1930s.
Okay, if you place your finger on the top row of the film.
The subject places her fingertips on a sheet of photographic paper, which lies on top of an electrically charged plate. The paper is exposed and developed like an ordinary black and white photograph. The results, however, are not at all ordinary. These Kirlian motion pictures revealed that an energy field, or corona, exists around each fingertip as it does around different parts of the body. This corona, rather than remaining constant, varies with changes in the subject's state of mind. In one experiment, the subject, calm at the start, is pricked with an unpleasantly sharp object. The corona of her thumb, at first brilliant and wide, becomes increasingly smaller and less distinct under stress, until, with the subject at her most anxious, it almost disappears. In a reverse experiment, a tense subject is invited to have a drink and relax, under strictly controlled conditions, of course. At the outset, the subject is anxious. His corona is thin. After 9 ounces of alcohol, it becomes broader. After 14 ounces, it displays what you might almost call a rosy glow.
You certainly look more than I am.
Yes, well, okay.
In an experiment done with cancerous and healthy rats, the results indicate a definite difference in the corona around their tails. The implications of this research are promising. If these tests are substantiated, perhaps one day Kirlian photography will be used as a tool in medical diagnosis. Every living thing radiates an energy all its own. Yet to what do these energy fields correspond? Kirlian photographs of plant leaves and flower petals have raised some curious and as yet unanswered questions. Normally, healthy plants have distinctive, colorful coronas. On a few occasions, when part of a leaf has been cut off, a strange ghost afterimage appears. Researchers call it the phantom leaf effect, but no one knows yet what it means. What happens when 2 human energy fields come in contact? Tim and Lois are lovers. Photographed alone, his finger's aura is blue and spiky. Hers is white and softer around the edges. When they touch, their coronas mix and mingle. In contrast, observe this Kirlian photograph of people who are a little angry at each other. And this one, in which the person on the left is extremely hostile. Research has shown that the auras of the strong tend to dominate the weak, as can be seen in this Kirlian family portrait. Mother and father at the top, child at the bottom, rather overwhelmed.
The soul also drives development according to a plan, first through infancy.
Even people born without a limb can feel a phantom.
First through infancy.
And it's amazing. I just think, when you look at it, to me, I believe that the flash of light is the moment that the God-given spirit of man enters the egg and life begins. I think this is the beginning of life for a person.
Then childhood, then adulthood. The increasing levels of complexity and unity at each developmental stage flow from the soul.
Sometimes answers come from unlikely sources. In this case, the unlikely source was a woman named Pam Reynolds. A stunning array of scientific instruments and measurements were in place at the very moment of Pam Reynolds' death. The results were astonishing. At age 35, Pam was diagnosed with a life-threatening brain aneurysm. Her only hope was a very unusual operation. In order to fix the problem and to save her life, doctors would have to drain the blood out of Pam Reynolds' head. What's more, her body temperature would be lowered to 60 degrees. Her heartbeat and breathing would stop completely, and her brain waves would be flattened. Doctors who perform this intense procedure have nicknamed it standstill, because for all intents and purposes, Pam Reynolds would be dead. But what happened was so thoroughly unique and unexpected, Dr. Michael Sabin, a cardiologist and the author of Light and Death, made an extensive evaluation of the Pam Reynolds experience.
The process of death, scientifically, now is known to be a process and not a point in time. It starts with normal waking reality and ends up in irreversible death. During this process, the body dies at different rates. The problem we have as scientists and physicians is to determine when the brain is actually dead, i.e. when the person is actually dead.
In the case of Pam Reynolds, one of the surgeon's main concerns was seizure activity, which could prove deadly during such a delicate procedure. To guard against this and other complications, Pam's brain and body were extensively instrumented and monitored, which makes what happened next even more intriguing. Pam told the doctors she left her body and became a spectator to what they were doing to her body. Later, she was able to describe people, procedures, and even medical instruments she could not possibly have seen.
Pam Reynolds had a very deep near-death experience at the time that she had documented no brainwave activity, no brainstem activity, and actually the blood had been physically drained from her head at the time. So this eliminates the possibility that this was a seizure phenomenon, because during her experience she had no seizure activity on the EEG. In addition, she had plugs in both of her ears, and so she could not have physically heard what was being discussed in the operating room during the surgical procedure, and she could recall the accurate discussions that were going on between the surgeons at the time that she was having her experience.
Remember, every bodily reflex was being monitored. She was in a profoundly inactive state. But Pam Reynolds somehow was able to describe a particular surgical tool in amazing detail. A tool which she would later say looked like an electric toothbrush with a dent in it. She even noticed that the tool had interchangeable blades and that these were kept in something that she said looked like a socket wrench case. How could Pam Reynolds have described with such amazing accuracy the details of what took place in the operating room when she was, according to all monitoring devices, dead? Dr. J.P. Moreland, professor of philosophy at Bible University, finds this kind of experience compelling.
The most provocative evidence for heaven from near-death experiences seems to me to be cases where people come back from near-death experiences and they have information there's no way they could have had if they had just had a physical experience while on an operating table. For example, some people come back and they're able to recount conversations that their relatives have had 5 blocks away from the hospital. In other occasions, people have actually had experiences of objects on the hospital roof or somewhere else, where when people go to investigate whether those experiences were real, they see the objects just as the people saw them. In other occasions, people have met dead relatives that died about the same time the person died in the near-death experience. And they came back and reported the death of a relative that no one there in the operating room knew about. Now, this provides pretty strong evidence that something more is going on than just a lack of oxygen to the brain.
Given that when you stop breathing and your heart stops, and given that 10 seconds after that, that the EEG, the measure of electrical brain activity, goes absolutely flat, it's medically inexplicable that near-death experiences are having a conscious conscious experience. For years, however, some medical researchers had dismissed the NDE phenomenon as hallucinations caused by the dying body releasing a chemical cocktail as a means of defense against the pain and shock of impending death. That theory was dented in 1984 by an extraordinary medical emergency in the American West Coast city of Seattle. Maria, a migrant worker from Eastern Europe, was rushed to hospital after she collapsed at a friend's home. In the ICU, a medical team tried to stabilize her condition without success. Her heart stopped beating. Maria's body was lifeless for several minutes, but the doctors kept on trying to bring her back to life. Then they suddenly realized that the heart monitor showed some life. Maria was supposed to be dead. Maria came back to life and immediately told an amazing story. She saw everything while she left her body. She could see the medical team working on her. She then left the ICU to the roof of the hospital, and as she went up, saw a tennis shoe. No one believed her story, but her friends immediately ran up to the roof and with absolute shock found the tennis shoe exactly as described by Maria. Maria's experience could not be anything other than the absolute truth. If the out-of-body experience was purely a mental aberration, how could she have seen a physical reality that could later be verified?
So explain that to me. Explain that through chemicals or some of the other scientific explanations. Please explain to me why that man knows that.
There is no explanation for that in current neuroscience. I personally and professionally am not afraid of saying that I don't know, because that's the way we learn.
After she was wired up and in bed, I would then go off to another room, use a random number table to get a 5-digit random number, which I'd write on a piece of paper and slip it in an opaque folder. And then I'd come in and put it up on a shelf near the ceiling, a flat shelf. So the number was not visible to anyone down in the room, much less on the bed, but if you happened to be viewing the room from near the ceiling, you could clearly read the number. And I put a clock near the number also. And I told her, I mean, this sounds terribly preposterous, but I said, if you leave your body, try to float up to a position where you can not only read and memorize the number, but see what time it is also, and then try to wake up right afterwards so I can have an exact idea of when you had that particular part of the experience.
Tart changed the number every day. On the first 3 mornings, the woman said she felt as though she'd left her body during the night, but she couldn't say what the number was.
She said that while she was out of her body, she was in the wrong part of the room, or she was outside the building or something like that. She had no idea what the number was because she hadn't seen it.
Then, on the 4th night, the subject woke up suddenly at about 3:35 in the morning. She said she'd just had an out-of-body experience in which she'd risen to the top of the room. She claimed she had seen the number.
She successfully told me that the number was 25132. Now, the odds of guessing a 5-digit number like that in one try are enormous. So I was quite excited, to put it mildly.
Tart examined the EEG readings of the electrical activity produced by the woman's brain. At the point that she believed she left her body, they had changed dramatically.
I had looked at many brainwave patterns of sleep over the years, and her brainwaves were simply unlike anything I'd seen before.
When she had the OBE, the woman's brain was producing alpha waves. In the rest of us, these are produced in the waking state and are rarely seen during sleep. It seemed that while she was asleep, part of her brain was behaving as though it was awake.
Anyone who was familiar with sleep wave patterns looking at them would say, this is unusual. I don't normally see this.
There's been a very good study of people that had cardiac arrests or heart attacks. About 15% of them had NDEs, and the remainder did not have NDEs. And then they studied this group of people for up to 7 years. And there's no question that the people that had NDEs were significantly different from the other group. They tended to have a more spiritual belief system. They had a much lower fear of death. They had a much less materialistic view of the world. They were much more interested in religion, and it really changed their lives a great deal. So this has been studied very carefully, or what is called prospective or controlled studies, and has been proven to be fact. The event is so common. The pattern of the experience is so consistent, and its effect on people is so profound, that just for that reason alone, even forgetting why or what the spiritual or religious implications are, NDEs are something that affect a lot of people in a major way. Research proves that near-death experience is legitimate. Nearly 12 to 15 million Americans have had NDE experiences. This is such an enormous number of shared experiences that so greatly affects their lives that no matter what the cause of NDE, no matter what your ideas about why it occurs, there is no question that given the number of lives that it has impacted, it makes sense to study it.
Now, what is interesting is that for me, the near-death experience is one of our ways, or one of the roads by which we can understand consciousness. So therefore, it should tell us something about human consciousness, and it should be central, and it's very important. Can we get funding for it? No. So this means that one of the most important sets of experiences that we need to do, we can't actually do. In fact, Sam and I put in a grant to one of the European institutions, and the idea was to put cards on the ceiling so that the people, when they had their cardiac arrest, could see the cards and report. And they came back and they said, brilliantly designed study, you can do it, no cards on the ceiling. Now that, of course, really altered exactly what we wanted to do. So if there is more money about, then we can do it properly. And so that's really what we have to do. But I think things are changing a little bit.
No, in general, I agree with Peter on this. And one of the sad things is that despite the great general interest, despite the media interest in this topic, there's no funding institution interest. You know, people don't die of near-death experiences, so there's not. You know, it's hard. You know, I submitted an NIH grant, and I could tell from the reviewers' comments that they didn't even know what study section to put this grant in. And the same with private foundations as well. It's really unfortunate because there's a lot more science and work that really could be done.
The other problem, though, is I think it's very difficult just even in collecting those stories because, first of all, in my experience, most people do not want to talk about it. With increased awareness of near-death experiences, more and more people are beginning to feel comfortable mentioning it. But the vast majority of people, if they mention it at all, they mention it to their spouse or their parent or someone, and they're immediately shut down, and they never talk about it again until they share that experience with me or someone else who would understand them. And so I think the first problem is actually having people tell you their story. The second problem, even with the idea of putting the cards, which on the surface sounds like a brilliant idea, I will tell you that from my personal experience, I probably would have come back and not been able to discuss the cards because
I think that's
it
old
was
technology
wholly
now.
Unimportant. I
things have moved
would
on
never
from that.
have even thought twice about taking those notes, partly because I had no intention of coming back. And so I think it's very difficult to design a study like that that would prove this out-of-body consciousness.
It's an incredible phenomenon. And again, the implications are enormous.
Astral projection is kind of a generic term for an out-of-body experience. And it's commonly practiced in the occult, spiritual business, and in other spiritual disciplines. The consciousness of the person leaves the physical or corporal body and travels somewhere within the spiritual world independent of the body. Astral projection also includes other spiritual things like lucid dreaming and rising on the planets and that kind of thing, which I don't have time to go into today. But here you can see in these two incidents, Paul, he was harpazo, snatched up into heaven, and John uses different terminology here. He carried me in spirit, or I became in spirit. Okay, so here we have two instances where it appears that the inner man did leave the body, but here's the key to it. It was 100% God prompted. It wasn't them doing it. It was God doing it to them. The problem that we're running into now with people who are doing astral travel, I've had dozens of them in my office trying to get rid of powerful familiar spirits. It's a fight. Is that the person is trying to induce it themselves. If you are trying to induce astral travel yourself, right, that is extremely dangerous, and that is of Satan. You're probably going to pick up a familiar spirit. I have had dozens of charismatics and prophetics in my office that have come for counseling, trying to get rid of demons who have been involved in astral travel, and it has always been familiar spirits. And these people started out trying to develop their ability to do it. The second interesting thing about these two great men of God who were involved with astral travel is that it was all controlled by the Holy Spirit. It wasn't self-controlled. In other words, they weren't traveling on their own and doing it on their own. It was being done to them, and the Holy Ghost was controlling where they went, who they saw, who they met, and what happened when they did it. The problem with astral projection is that the person attempts to induce it themselves, and they go through a process in the satanic cults where you can train yourself to do it, and it does work. You can train yourself to be an astral projectionist. That's not somebody that works in a movie theater. I'm talking about spiritually leaving your body. It is possible to do it, and it is real. The problem is you're going to pick up familiar spirits, and you're going to be extremely infected. And then later on, you're going to develop strange physical illnesses in your body.
Started having out-of-body experiences when I was 12. At the beginning, they were spontaneous, they were involuntary. I really didn't know what I was doing or what type of an experience I have. So I didn't know if there was a name, if other people did it, if everybody did it. And then after that, I started having some very infrequently, maybe like once a year, and it wasn't until I was about 17 that I read the first book on out-of-body experiences. And they already were suggesting a technique. So I started trying it a little bit more with techniques, and by the time I was 23 or so, I found my colleagues at the IAC, and they had already pulled a lot of information together, and then my out-of-body experiences took off even further. I was very sure it was something real, yes, even from the first one. The first one happened due to a computer. I guess at that time, in the 80s, I had a computer. I was starting really to learn to program. And maybe because it was something more intellectual, that afternoon I went to sleep in my bed. I was sleepy, but then after maybe like a half an hour or 40 minutes, I was aware, again, thinking about the program that I wanted to design with my hands on the keyboard. And after a few seconds, I guess, it sort of like dawned on me, didn't I go to sleep? And then the moment that I turned around to look at my bed and, in the direction where my body should be, I saw my physical body, and it surprised me, and I came into my physical body and immediately woke up, and I knew very clearly I was over there, but I was over here, but I was over there, but I was over here. I really didn't understand what had happened, but I was very, very clear that, this was not a dream. Many of those things, we cannot describe them because the language that we have here, right, whichever language happens to be, has the words to describe the physical reality. Sometimes something that I say that is very, that might give the idea faster is, related even to the senses. We see because it's a certain range of, light wavelengths. And then we have colors for all of these wavelengths. But then outside the body, the astral body doesn't limit itself to the same limits as the physical body. So then outside the body, we can see more colors. But for those other colors that are outside of our normal range of perception, we just don't have the words for them. And then you come back and you can visualize it in your mind. You understand it in your mind, but you cannot explain it to anybody. Sometimes we say it's almost like trying to explain to somebody who's blind from birth the color blue. And then we just simply don't have words to describe the color blue. We have to see it. We are actually having an experience when we are having an out-of-body experience, a real experience, outside of our body, as the phrase says. So while we are outside the body, you can observe, for example, the physical reality pretty much in real time, and you can see what is happening there. If you look at yourself, you realize that you're wearing, or you're using, I guess, what people usually call an astral body, a body that looks exactly like your physical body to the most minute detail, even, a little scar that you might have from when you fell and broke your arm as a kid, the astral body has that. And you can go and see the real physical dimension, reality, which helps us also to confirm, by the way, the out-of-body experiences. Something I did once when I was a teenager. Even though I knew I was clear that I was having out-of-body experiences, I wanted sort of like to have more of a verification or a proof of that. So something that I did is, I remember I left my body and I went, it's very simple, really, anybody can do it, but I went maybe like 3 or 4 blocks away from my house, and I wanted to see in the middle of the night the cars that were parked there, the colors of the cars, and then I tried to memorize the license plate of one of them. And then I came back to my body, and then here you had the 17-year-old in his pajamas walking at 2 a.m. in the morning, to go verify, the cars. And when I arrived, it was exactly the same cars and exactly the same license plate. So when you're having an out-of-body experience, you can see, what is happening in the physical reality, but the physical people normally cannot perceive you, simply because the physical eye and the physical ear are not tuned to the astral body. They really cannot see you. Our 5 senses are not able to perceive, the non-physical reality. Now, sometimes there are people who have a little bit of clairvoyance or a little bit of clairaudience, and then a little more intuition, and then they might be able to perceive or sense something. And it happens from time to time, but in most of the cases, people are not able to see you. Yes, almost the same. Obviously, there isn't the near-death part, so the reason why you left the body is not because your physical body died. And there are some near-death experiences that don't have the out-of-body experience component. So there are some people who die, and they only see their body, or they are unconscious for a while, and then they resuscitate. But most of the times, or in a lot of the times, they have the out-of-body experience component, and then they describe, the tunnel or a bright light. They go to some other dimension. They meet certain relatives of theirs. They come back. Many times also in the out-of-body experience, a field, we call the near-death experience a forced out-of-body experience.
I was a young man in my early 20s, and I decided to come back here. I wasn't done with the reason I had been here. I clearly remember squeezing down, getting smaller, and coming into my body. It was like slamming back into the pain of this existence. So I come back, at that time, a college student studying mechanical engineering and physics. I come back into this life and I go on with that career, but they're teaching me Newtonian physics. They're teaching me that this is 3D is it. And I'm always, from the beginning, from then on, I'm on the other side. No, there's all the rest of this energy. There's all the rest of this out here.
There are a lot of different conventional theories for why people are reporting out-of-body experiences. One is that, yes, for example, the experiments of Olaf Blank, and other different individuals, where they put a camera and they're transmitting to your eyes, another perspective of yourself, and then people describe that they are feeling as if they were outside their body. Or sometimes there are certain experiments in which they stimulate a certain area of the brain, and people describe an experience that could be like an out-of-body experience. And actually, I would say all of that is fine. It's just that that doesn't mean that the real out-of-body experience doesn't exist. So sometimes we say, you know, you can stimulate the brain, and sometimes people start smelling, for example, the smell of lemon. And that's certainly an experiment that can be done. But the fact that you can, you know, that by stimulating the brain, you can smell lemon, doesn't deny the fact that the actual lemon really exists. It just simply means that it's another way of, you know, having the smell of lemon in your head. Maybe some of those theories explain some accounts on out-of-body experiences, but the actual full out-of-body experience, what we see, all the evidence that we have, it's an objective, you know, or as an objective experience as there is. You know, you leave the body, you can see, again, the physical reality in real time, observe it, know things, learn things that you didn't know before. There's also a few other things. For example, many of those theories have a hard time explaining what happens when two people leave the body. You meet outside the body, you have a common experience, even very far away from your five senses, and then you come back and you both remember it. And then those type of theories are not able to, you know, account for that, the joint out-of-body experiences. Several experiments have actually already been done with this. Even us at the IAC, we have this course, this experiment, this research activity that we do. We call it the projective field, where basically we have about 50, 60 people lying in the ballroom of a hotel room, and they're supposed to leave their body, go to another little room in the hotel room, in another wing of the hotel room, where we have put a laptop that just simply generates a random image and displays it on the screen. And outside of the room, there is an auditor, somebody that is not associated with the ISC. Usually it's a college professor or a journalist, somebody that has some authority. So the people in the ballroom, they leave their body, they go, they try to see the image, they come back, then we give them a form, you know, they describe what they saw. We take this form to the auditor who signs it, sort of like certifying, attesting that, you know, he received all these forms before opening the door, and then we go in and we compare. And we have already had success with that, you know, that shows that the person was somehow perceiving it. It doesn't mean it necessarily happened through an out-of-body experience, but certainly it was, you know, a non-physical or some mechanism of perception that went beyond the five senses, like remote viewing, maybe an intuition. Really, there can be several possibilities, but definitely not the five senses.
Although the human soul is the form of the body, the soul is not just that. In addition to organizing and animating our body, the soul also lives in a special way beyond the body, even in this life. And the soul lives beyond the body by exercising certain special higher operations of knowing and loving.
I'd really like to share with you some groundbreaking scientific experiments on DNA. You may find that they are not taught or discussed in schools or in the media. Some people feel that it is because these findings challenge the conventional wisdom and the status quo. You can draw your own conclusions after you watch today's video. I'm Sharon, and this is Straight Talk. DNA was first discovered more than 150 years ago, but how it worked remained a mystery for another 100 years or so. Scientists worked out DNA structure in the 1950s. The double helix of two intertwining strands is now a familiar sight for many. The discovery of quantum theory in the turn of the 20th century completely transformed our research and understanding of DNA. The DNA phantom effect. In 1985, Russian scientists tested to see how DNA interacts with photons, the tiny units that make up light.
So you could be forgiven. The way I've described this to you in the last few minutes, you could get the idea that maybe these particles are somehow like little Lego bricks, or they're a bit like the Victorian atoms. They're sort of solid little points that move around and stick together. But actually, that's not what modern particle physics tells us particles are. In fact, particles aren't really what matters at all. Our field is kind of badly named in a sense. What actually we think of as being fundamental are not particles, but fields. So
the paper wasn't published until the 1990s. They first created a vacuum in a special tube by removing all air from it. A vacuum to many of us means an empty space with nothing in it, but to scientists, something still remains inside: photons, particles of light.
The way we think of these particles are actually as little tiny ripples moving through these fields. So
the scientists first measured where the particles were inside the tube with a sophisticated and very expensive laser device. The result came back as expected. The photons were scattered randomly in no particular order. Then they placed samples of human DNA inside the tube. Here came the first surprise. The photons moved and formed a specific pattern. The DNA was clearly having a direct influence over the photons. This is significant because it means something within our body has a direct effect on physical matter outside of our body, without us having actually to do anything. This is not something that classic physics could explain. Also, the scientists discovered that the DNA acted like a sponge to the light, sucking all photons in the area in some strange way, and literally stored them in the molecule in the shape of a curved spiral. The second surprise came when the DNA was removed from the tube. Instead of returning to the original scattered state, the particles of light remained in the same place for 30 days, as if the DNA were still in the tube. This phenomenon was named the DNA phantom effect. The experiment was repeated multiple times under rigid controls in a laboratory, and the same results were achieved. Many questions were raised. How did DNA manage to influence the particles? What made it possible for DNA to continue to influence the particles after it was removed? Did DNA store energy? You probably are thinking, what did the scientists say then? Well, they said in the research paper that they were forced to accept the working hypothesis that some new field structure is being excited. Translating into plain English, they were basically saying that DNA influences matter through a mysterious energy field that they don't really know much about. Many agree that this discovery gives us strong reasons to believe that some sort of energy field of the universe may act in our DNA, and that the full genetic code of all things alive may not completely consist of the molecule of DNA, or at least that's not the only location. The experiment by the US Army and Dr. Baxter. Dr. Cleve Baxter was best known for his experiments with plants in the 1960s. He found that plants feel pain and have extrasensory perception. His work was discredited by the scientific community then, but more recent studies may lend more support to his claim. Well, this is a separate topic for another video. In the 1990s, Dr. Baxter designed an experiment for a joint project with the US Army. It was to access the remote power of human feelings on living cells and DNA. His team collected some tissue containing DNA from the inside of a volunteer's mouth. This swab of tissue was taken to another room several hundred feet away in the same building. Then the DNA sample was placed in a specially designed chamber and measured electrically to see if it responded to the emotions of the donor. In the other room, the donor was shown a series of videos, like combat scenes, erotic images, and comedy, designed to create a range of genuine and strong emotions inside his body within a short period of time. When the donor experienced emotional peaks or dips, his cells and DNA hundreds of feet away showed a powerful electrical response at the same moment, as if they were still physically connected to his body. The question we're all asking is, how is that possible? The Army later stopped their experiments, but Dr. Baxter and his team continued, and they took the investigations even further. At one point, the donor and his cells were 350 miles apart. The scientists used an atomic clock located in Colorado to measure the response time taken by the cell. In each measurement, the time lapse between the emotion and the cell's response was 0, meaning the response was simultaneous. The experiments were repeated and showed, regardless of distance, The DNA in the cells reacted at the same time when the donor had an emotional response, as if it were still connected to the donor's body.
The brain is just like a television set. It's a receiving station. The consciousness exists outside the body. If you think about your consciousness as existing outside of your body, but telling itself that the locus of your consciousness is in your head, so then you're going to experience everything inside the body, then you can see how easy it is to go out of body.
The out-of-body experiences show that, certainly, that we are not the brain, that we go beyond the brain. It is interesting sometimes when you are outside the body, just in a very simple experience, for example, looking at your physical body lying in bed and sleeping, and you realize my brain is there, keeping all of my vital functions alive, but my brain has no idea what I am doing right now. And then I can go and experience and learn and observe so many things that my brain actually doesn't know, and will only know if when I come back to my physical body, I decide to download the information from the astral body into my brain, which many times I do, of course, but sometimes you might not want to. And then the brain still doesn't know. Doesn't mean that the information is lost, because when you go outside the body the next time, you can remember it. It's in the astral body, simplifying here a little bit. So we are much more than the brain. The brain is certainly a very complex organ, not to put it down at all, but it seems to be more the receiver of consciousness. All of these experiences show us that, than really being the producer. It's an assumption that conventional science, has, and the neurobiology has, that, consciousness is a product of our biochemistry, but really something that hasn't been proven, either or against, certainly. So the evidence on the near-death experiences, like even Alexander and many other people, Raymond Moody, Parnia, etc., all of that evidence shows or starts to hint at the fact that the brain is really more the receiver of consciousness than really the producer.
The results have shown that human emotions clearly have a direct influence on living DNA. People may wonder, didn't the donor's emotion need to travel to the other tissue? Some people suggested that perhaps the cells connected through an energy field or even remained together in a deeper dimension, and the emotion didn't have to travel after all. Note the mysterious energy field came up here again. If that idea is true, does it imply that we can't really separate people from parts of their bodies? What about those who have received organ transplants, where their new organs still respond to the original owner's emotions at a fundamental level? Also, it makes me wonder what happens when genetic materials or viruses are injected into our body. Although the research is about human DNA, we simply don't know enough about DNA in general.
Around the world, hundreds of organ recipients have reported disturbing experiences. France, 2005, a woman is haunted by vivid images of her donor's death in a car crash. Croatia, 2006, a lumberjack develops an obsession for domestic chores after receiving a kidney from a dead housewife. Georgia, 2007, a man given the heart of a suicide victim kills himself in exactly the same way. Are all these cases coincidental? Or is it possible these people have acquired traits from the dead? Professor of Neurology Dr. Gary Schwartz has been researching this phenomenon for the past 15 years.
There are now enough of those cases available to justify saying this is a serious possibility.
Dr. Schwartz is the co-author of a paper that analyzes 10 real-life case histories in which transplant patients claim they have acquired personality traits from their donors. One anonymous case involves two young girls, an 8-year-old who receives the heart of a 10-year-old murder victim.
After the heart transplant surgery, this young girl began to have dreams. And in these dreams, she saw this girl being murdered. And the details were so specific about what the murderer looked like and details regarding the murder that this information was then passed on to the police. And it turned out that that information helped this man to be caught and ultimately prosecuted. Now, how do we explain that a young girl could be getting details about a murder that nobody knew unless she's somehow picking it up from the organ that's inside her?
Is this proof that memories can be transplanted with organs?
Experiment by Glenn Rang and Rolling McCarthy of HeartMath. We probably have all been told, or told others, to cheer up and think positively. This experiment may just give us some insights into those words of wisdom. In the early 1990s, researchers from HeartMath placed a human DNA in a glass beaker and then exposed to a strong form of emotion from up to 5 people. In this series of experiments, the DNA didn't belong to the participants. Without physically touching it or doing anything other than creating precise feelings in their bodies, the participants were able to influence the DNA molecules in the beaker. Participants were trained to use specially designed mental and emotional self-management techniques, which involve intentionally quieting the mind, shifting one's awareness to the heart area, and focusing on positive emotions. The principal researcher said the data indicated that when individuals are in a heart-focused, loving state with a strong intention, they have a great ability to alter the shape or structure of DNA, which will lead to biological changes in vital cell functions. Distance in this physical world appears to be of no consequence with regard to the effect. Think about it. Through developing focused and strong positive emotions, not only do we have power to affirm our DNA or existence, we may also be able to send support to those who need it but are not with us physically. Wait, doesn't it sound a lot like praying?
Many of our vital activities are the workings of organs. Circulation of the blood, for example, is the work of the heart and other organs. Digestion is a work of the stomach, the intestines, etc. And even many of our cognitive activities are the work of organs. For example, seeing and hearing. If damage is done to someone's eyes or ears, seeing and hearing either diminish or cease.
Whilst near-death experiences change lives, they've also given some individuals extraordinary experiences that they would never have dreamt of. The most intriguing examples are of blind people becoming sighted for the first time. Vicky Nuratuk had been blind from birth.
I've never seen anything, no light, no shadows, no nothing. A lot of people ask if I see black. No, I do not see black. I do not see anything at all. And in my dreams, I don't see any visual impressions. It's just taste, touch, sound, and smell, but no visual impressions of anything.
In her early 20s, Vicky was involved in a serious car accident.
The next thing I recall, I was in Harborview Medical Center and looking down at everything that was happening. And it was frightening because I'm not accustomed to see things visually because I'd never had before. And initially it was pretty scary. And then I finally recognized my wedding ring and my hair, and I thought, is this my body down there? And am I dead or what?
We can't bring her back. It's a Astral.
They kept saying, we can't bring her back, we can't bring her back, and they were trying to frantically work on this thing that I discovered was my body, and I felt very detached from it. And sort of, so what? And I was thinking, you know, what are these people getting so upset about? Then I thought, I'm out of here. I can't get these people to listen to me. And as soon as I thought that, I went up through the ceiling as if it were nothing. And it was wonderful to be out there and be free, not worry about bumping into anything. And I knew where I was going. And I heard the sound of wind chimes. It was the most incredible sound. that I could describe. It was from the very lowest to the very highest tones. As I was approaching this area, there were trees and there were birds and quite a few people, but they were all like made out of light. And I could see, and it was incredible, really beautiful, and I was overwhelmed by that experience because I couldn't really imagine what light was like. It's still a very emotional thing when I talk about this because there was a point at which I could bring forth any knowledge I wanted to have. And it was like this place was where all knowledge was. And then I was sent back, and then I went back into my body, and it was excruciatingly painful and very heavy, and I remember feeling very sick.
Vicky's case suggests that her mind was working at a time when her brain was unable to supply her with such visual information, even if she could see. With some scientists questioning the idea that near-death experiences might be occurring when the brain has stopped functioning, the work by Dr. Pim van Lommel and Dr. Sam Parnier and Peter Fennick may have huge implications for neuroscience.
If you look through science, what's amazing is that the things that any group of scientists often believe as being completely black and white, I mean completely correct. If you look 50 years later, most, if not all of them, have been changed. And I think with this subject as well, in the future, we'll find that actually mind may well be a separate scientific entity that can continue functioning when we've reached the end of life and when the brain has stopped working. That will have huge implications for all of mankind. There's no doubt about it. It will revolutionize our whole way of scientific thinking, and it will open up a whole new field of science, which has as of yet been undiscovered.
If I was in a road accident, I would be quite happy to stay where I was now. My children have grown up. I've got no problems, no difficulties, certainly no fear of death. It's almost now as if I would actually welcome it.
I'm very thankful to have had this experience because it helped me in many aspects of my life, and it helped me to deal with things a lot more constructively than I might have otherwise.
I would die to have a near-death experience. Yes, that's a corny answer, I know, but it's true. Had I not had that near-death experience, I would have no interest in being here today.
I think death is an illusion. I think death is a really nasty, bad lie.
And in this video, I'm going to be discussing a research article titled Near-Death and Out-of-Body Experiences in the Blind, a study of apparent eyeless vision. This is an incredible investigation of near-death experiences that challenges some of our basic scientific assumptions about the nature of consciousness and life and death. People who have near-death experiences typically report detailed visual perceptions. So what happens when a person who has been blind from birth has a near-death experience? If that individual is suddenly somehow able to see and can accurately describe visual perceptions, what does that tell us? This video is going to share some of the incredible findings from this study and examine why the researchers ultimately conclude that consciousness very well may continue after the death of the physical body. Could it be that there is some truth to the idea of an afterlife in a way that we don't yet understand? Join me and let's explore.
Brad Barrows has been blind since birth, but one day, 27 years ago, gravely ill with pneumonia, Barrows stopped breathing. Brad believes he was on the verge of death and had begun his trip to heaven.
It was very peculiar to me. In fact, to this day, I'm not sure I can fully explain it. I truly believe I was there.
Brad and Vicky were both participants in this study, And their stories lead us straight to the heart of some of life's biggest questions. While mainstream science insists that near-death experiences are simply explained as hallucinations in the brain, there's now more evidence than ever before that this is simply not the case, and many of these near-death experiences cannot be explained by any conventional means. Given the consistency in near-death experiences, the researchers were curious if blind people would also report similar characteristics and details to their experiences. And towards that end, the researchers interviewed 31 blind individuals who had near-death and out-of-body experiences. And 31 individuals is a small sample size. More research is absolutely needed here, but nonetheless, this study provides some amazing evidence. The researchers found that near-death experiences among the blind closely resemble near-death experiences amongst the sighted and contain all of the same characteristics. And these include an awareness of being located outside of one's physical body, an overwhelming feeling of peace and well-being, moving through a tunnel or a passage, experiencing another world of much beauty, encountering spiritual beings or deceased loved ones before being invited or sent back. The researchers also confirmed that blind individuals do report visual perceptions during their near-death experiences. 80% of the sample in this study reported that they had some sort of vision during their near-death or out-of-body experience. Even among those who were blind from birth, 64% reported a visual near-death experience. Several of the individuals in this study expressed their astonishment and confusion at being able to suddenly see light and color during this near-death experience. For example, one individual said, "I had a hard time relating to seeing because I never experienced it, and it was something very foreign to me. It was like hearing words and not being able to understand them, but knowing that they were words." These are called veridical perceptions, where near-death experiencers acquire verifiable information that they couldn't have obtained by any normal means. And this is some of the most astonishing and compelling evidence that these near-death experiences are much more than hallucinations, and I'll explain why. In this article, the authors describe the case of Nancy, who, despite being blind and unconscious, during her near-death experience, she correctly described detailed perceptions of an encounter between her friend and significant other down the hospital hallway. All of those details were later confirmed as accurate. And if there were just one or two isolated instances of these veridical near-death experiences, then maybe we could dismiss them as chance or coincidence. But there are hundreds of well-documented cases of these veridical near-death experiences.
Another shocking case was in 1987, when the Chinese scientific community carried out a special investigation. They studied the near-death experiences of lucky survivors of the Great Tangshan earthquake. They found 100 people and had 81 respondents. Nearly half of these people were aware of their souls leaving their bodies as they lost consciousness. Some people even saw their specters in the air or on the ceiling. Their souls had still vital signs such as a pulse, respiration, etc. Sometimes they even returned to their physical body. About a quarter of the respondents said they met their deceased relatives in the form of glow. Especially, many people reported that they suddenly had flashbacks of their entire life. These memories were simply like a flow of time and not controlled by the brain.
Imagine this. You're working in a hospice, and one person there that you've taken a liking to is a former merchant marine who's dying of stomach cancer. Let's call him Ron. One day you're sitting at his bedside reading to him, and suddenly you feel a great force take hold of you. Before you know it, you're floating in the air as if you're somehow out of your body. But guess what? There's another ghostly body floating in the air. It's Ron, and he looks at you and smiles. He looks very content indeed, as if trying to tell you that he's A-okay with clocking out and getting a new room in the afterlife. Suddenly, you feel yourself drop, as if your soul has joined your body again. On the bed next to you is Ron. He takes a few more breaths and dies. The end. Okay, so we know some of you viewers occasionally allude to the possibility of infographic show writers ingesting large amounts of hallucinogens and then writing a story. And that's because some of our tales are quite far out. Today is about as far out as it gets. And when this is finished, you might very well think differently about your life and death. Ron was real. Well, according to William Peters, the man who was volunteering at a hospice when his soul left his body. As you can imagine, William was a bit freaked out by what happened, as anyone would be. He talked to his friends about it and was like, dude, I left my body today. And his friends were like, dude, go easy on the ketamine. But William knew that he'd experienced something earth-shattering, and so he started to research the matter. It was no small deal, of course. If that's true, then science needs to do some explaining, and atheists might want to start revisiting their convictions. What William found out was that what he'd experienced was something that other people have experienced, and the term for it is shared death experience. Before we talk about people who've seen incredibly mind-blowing things after they died and came back, let's first look into shared near-death experiences. First, you need to know that the term was coined by a guy named Raymond Moody. He spent 2 decades researching what happens on the other side, and during his research he realized that quite a few folks walk down tunnels toward a bright light, but some people meet other spiritual beings just before they kick the bucket. Raymond said he never quite bought the idea of near-death experiences being the consequence of something called anoxia, a lack of oxygen in the brain that leads to tripping out for a few seconds. He said that it's unlikely. And how do you explain people who are perfectly healthy doing a jig with the dying? We don't have that opinion in shared death experiences because the bystanders aren't ill or injured, and yet they experience the same kind of things, said Raymond in an interview. We should add here that most shared death experiences are different from Bill's, in that people dream of the person dying, and when they wake up, that person in the dream is dead. This has happened a lot. It happened to the American artist Caldonia Curry. This is what she said. I opened the window and the snow started to come through my body, transforming into points of light that bloomed into these intricate snow blossoms. I heard my mom's voice talking to me, and I was filled with a very profound sense of well-being and love. I woke up weeping, my face covered in tears. A few hours later, her sister called to tell her her mom was dead. Do a bit of research and you can find stories like this all over the web. Okay, so now the skeptics take the floor and grab the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, they say, there's nothing to see here. Don't rush back to church too fast and put a hold on that paranormal club membership payment. They say the reason this happens, and we agree it happens, is just because they're traumatized, not enough oxygen is getting to their brain, or they're affected by medicine, or they're simply dreaming. All these things can do strange things to the mind. Really, quip the folks that have experienced this. Your scientific explanation for Ron floating in the air and people dying in dreams with their loved ones is that grief did it? It sounds to me that because science can't explain this phenomenon, you're just blaming temporary madness or a brain that isn't working right. That's too easy. It's a cop-out. Back to Raymond Moody. He went on to obtain a PhD in psychology and become a forensic psychiatrist and philosopher. He was an academic and later he became a writer who wrote a lot about deathbed experiences. He wrote a book about this called Life After Life, and in it he details scores of cases where folks were clinically dead but went on a bit of a jaunt. Raymond also believes in past lives, having had 9 of them himself. Have you ever had deja vu? Well, that might be because you had a past life, according to Raymond. Anyway, he started writing the book after speaking to a psychiatrist named Dr. George Ritchie. George, now dead, explained that when he was 20, he died for 9 and a bit minutes. He was pronounced dead twice by the doctor, but the stubborn man didn't give up the ghost. He came back to life eventually, but only after he got a Pulp Fiction-esque stab in the heart with adrenaline. So, what happened during those 9 minutes? Well, believe it or not, he claims to have met this guy that stars in some thriller book called The Bible. Yeah, he came face to face with Jesus Christ. Christ took him on a journey through space and time, which was a bit of a trip because there were all kinds of dimensions. He once said death is nothing more than a doorway, something you walk through. Some folks have questioned the validity of this guy's experience. They've said he was American and Christian, so isn't it just perfect that JC rules the universe? Why not Buddha or Krishna or Thor? Imagine 9 minutes hanging out with Thor. How cool would that be? Okay, back to being serious. Raymond, still alive and kicking, included over 150 cases of near-death experiences in his book. This book, by the way, has sold over 13 million copies, and it's kind of the Bible of NDEs. This is the lowdown on them. Many folks feel peace when released. Being dead is like being on Molly. People tend to feel ecstatic. Many of them come out of their bodies and go someplace. Many walk down a dark tunnel. And for some folks, there's a bright light at the end of that tunnel. Some others meet another being just like George met the Son of God. Some go back to their past and others visit a land of sheer beauty. We should say that Raymond said he had his own NDE after he tried to take his own life. Empiricists don't believe a word of it. Or rather, they don't deny those people had that wonderful experience, but they say it has nothing to do with an afterlife. Listen on and you can tell us what you think about this. Maybe some things just can't be scientifically explained. Perhaps that's what the Society for Psychical Research in London believed in the 1800s when they wrote about what they called deathbed visions. The main author of that paper was named William Barrett. In the early 20th century, he was a professor of physics at the Royal College of Science in Dublin. His wife was an obstetrician, and she saw a lot of women die in childbirth. Barrett spent decades listening to her stories and trying to understand the strange things that happened when people died or just before they died. He wrote a book about it, but he died a year before the book came out. So what's in the book, you're wondering? Here is one story. One woman who was on her deathbed said she saw her sister Vera. She held out her hand and said hello, but what the dying woman didn't know is that her sister had passed away some 3 weeks earlier. Anyhow, she got reacquainted and then expired herself. According to that book, that kind of thing happened to lots of people. Later in the 1970s, a researcher named Carlos Osis decided to do a deep dive into deathbed visions, but Carlos wondered how they went down in non-Christian societies as well as Christian societies, mainly Christian, we should say. Carlos wrote that in the US, a woman was on her deathbed, pretty much comatose, but suddenly she just sat up and she had a huge grin on her face. She said, "Oh, Katie, Katie," as if looking at someone. She then flopped down and died. It turned out she had a friend and an aunt, both named Katie. But in India, things were a bit different for the most part. Dying folks did have visions, but they weren't often of mere people. Much of the time they met gods, especially Hindu gods. Carlos wrote that a lot of folks claimed to meet Lord Yama, aka the god of death. They said hello, and then they died. Perhaps the weirdest thing that Carlos wrote about was some guy in a Muslim hospital in India. He was actually Christian, which isn't that uncommon in India. So this man, in his 50s, was about to be released from a hospital after being treated for a broken hip. The doctor said the man was in good health, but then complained of a pain in his chest. The doctor said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine." After which the man said, "I'm gonna die." "How do you know that?" said the doctor. The guy told him that he'd just seen Jesus and Jesus waved him over. After JC left the room, the guy told the doctor he was gonna die. He said he had just a few minutes left, and get this, he was right. His last words were, "I'm going." As for the Hindu experience, one guy in an Indian hospital was in because of a high fever caused by an infectious disease. One day he just sat up in bed and said, "Somebody's standing there. He has a cart with him, so he must be Yamdut. He must be taking someone with him. He's teasing me that he's gonna take me." What's a Yamdut, you're thinking? The answer is a messenger of death in the Hindu religion. Anyway, the guy then said that someone was pulling him out of bed, and he asked a nurse to help him. It was too late. Yamdut had him. He croaked there and then. Okay, so you're thinking these people are just hallucinating. It happens. People lose the plot sometimes. They see things. Hold your horses, you dogged skeptic. Haven't you heard of something called terminal lucidity? We guessed you hadn't. It's quite the strange phenomenon. What happens is a person is very ill, physically or mentally, but then they suddenly become better, and then they die. They might be suffering from a severe psychiatric or neurological disorder, unable to do anything, never mind communicate. And just before they pop their clogs, they get up and seem totally normal, like completely fixed, talkative, happy, not sick at all. It's as if they're allowed one last goodbye before they conk. Some folks have even come out of comas and said, "Hey, what's up, everybody?" and then they die. It's weird, and science has never actually been able to explain why it happens. People have been writing about this going back to ancient times, with some scholars saying the re-emerge seems spiritualized and elated. It's as if they know they're going to die, but with the help of something they get to bid farewell and not dribble phlegm down their chin while doing it. According to the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, these reawakened people bite the dust in a few days after their terminal lucidity, and some of them go within hours or even minutes. In one case, a guy had been catatonic for 20 years. One day he stood up, looked normal, and then checked out. In the UK, a 92-year-old woman living in a nursing home had suffered from severe Alzheimer's disease for many years. During her latter years, she didn't know where she was, who her family was. She didn't know anything. She was pretty much not in this world. But guess what? One day she just turned back to normal. She recalled her past, could have long conversations, knew all her family and reminisced with them. She was happy, talkative, perfectly normal, and then she just passed away. The researchers who wrote about this said it happened a lot. The last case, the strangest of all, was in Germany. It sounds unbelievable, and there are those that doubt it happened. But it is a fact that respected physicians witnessed it and wrote about it. It's about a 26-year-old woman named Anna Katharina Emmer. She was committed to an asylum and was looked after by two well-known physicians. This woman had been severely retarded from birth, never able to talk, never able to properly feed herself. She pooped and peed herself every day. Doctor said she was like a wild animal, never really aware what was happening around her. Okay, this is gonna blow you away. So one day, she was in the hospital bed after having her leg amputated because of osseous tuberculosis. Her family were there because the doctor said she wasn't going to make it. This woman that had never said a single word or recognized a family member, suddenly started chatting with everyone there. She was overjoyed, intelligent, and happy to talk about life. Doctors said she looked like she was enjoying spiritual ecstasy. For half an hour, she talked and laughed and smiled so wide. She then started singing a song that went like this: "Where does the soul find its home? It's peace. Peace, peace, heavenly peace." Half an hour later, she was dead. This is a true story. It's been talked about in journals, and no one, we mean no one, has ever been able to explain what happened. In fact, the Scientific American wrote that it was speculated that most scientists have shied away from the case and similar cases just because they don't meld well with scientific materialism. Can you explain it?
Let's focus on knowing. To know something is to conceive of a universal. When I know the formula for the area of a triangle, for example, I know something not about this or that particular triangle, but about triangle as such. My knowledge extends to all triangles, even though I have not and cannot either sense or imagine all triangles. My knowledge extends beyond all my experience of triangles and extends to all triangles whatsoever. This sort of abstract knowledge of universals, such as triangle, cannot be the working of an organ. For cognitive organs, such as the eyes and ears, are limited to knowing this or that particular thing. For example, this dog or this cat here. But the spiritual power of intellect is not limited to knowing this or that particular thing. By a higher kind of knowing, I can know something of all cats or dogs or all triangles. And therefore, the spiritual power of intellect is not just a physical organ like the brain. Something more than the working of organs is going on in the knowing of universals, or the essences of things. And if the knowing of universals is not one more case of the working of organs, then it is a spiritual activity or operation. And if the soul is carrying out a spiritual activity, the soul itself is spiritual. That is, it's more than just the form and animating principle of a body. The soul has a life of its own, the life within, or inner life. But this life within, or inner life, is not a separate thing from me or my body. It's one more activity of my rational soul. And the same rational soul is also the form of my body. The human soul can survive death because, in addition to forming and animating the body, the soul is spiritual and lives on this higher plane by the higher operations of knowing and loving.
By weighing the body of a man as he dies, Dr. Duncan McDougall is attempting to prove what all good Christians know, that we humans have souls. At the moment of death, the body of patient 1 loses 3/4 of an ounce of weight, 21 grams. But McDougall needs more lives in the balance. A single result could always be dismissed as experimental error. He records a weight loss in his second and third patients. With his fourth patient, things don't go so well. Some believe what the doctor is doing is sacrilege.
Ah, doctor. I trust you won't be much longer.
The hospital staff famously interrupted McDougall's experiment, and it could well be this quite powerful superstitious belief that actually the soul is being endangered rather than measured. And there were very powerful popular superstitions that the soul had to actually get out of the body at one level, and it had to get out of the building at another level. So it's not unknown for people in McDougall's lifetime to be opening a hole in a roof, to be opening windows.
And that kind of superstition wrecks his fourth test.
Ma'am, I must protest. You have just ruined the experiment.
I'm so sorry.
The next death records a loss in weight of 3/8 of an ounce. McDougall now has 4 samples. All have lost weight. Has he measured his patients' departing souls? Or has he missed something?
Like any good scientist, McDougall then had to come up with alternative explanations for the weight that he had discovered in order to rule them out. The obvious option, of course, was the urine and the feces released by the subject upon death. But he argued that these weights were taken into account because they were on the bed with the patient at the time of death.
That's not the only variable. Could it be that he's just measuring the weight of their final breath?
He spent some time on the scale himself, breathing out really hard to see if that changed the way the scale registered, and it did not. So he accounted for those bits.
Density and electric potential go hand in hand. The denser something is, the more electric potential it can hold.
And it's amazing. I just think, when you look at it, to me, I believe that the flash of light is the moment that the God-given spirit of man enters the egg and life begins. I think this is the beginning of life.
Not that I believe in the model of the atom, but even the periodic table has a distinction on the amount of electric potential there is in the different elements. In this demonstration, I have a metal button hanging from helium balloons that keep the button buoyant just above the ground. By only adding more electrostatic potential to the button, you can see it will appear heavier and force the buoyant object down along the vector lines created by the electrostatic potential difference. Without changing the density of the medium or the object, one can change the overall weight or gravitas of the object.
But McDougall's death watches don't sit well with the medical staff. Eventually, he's ejected from the home. He's forced to end his research.
Excuse me, nurse. I need my...
Uncertain how to proceed, McDougall keeps his experiments secret for 6 years until, in 1907, the New York Times breaks the story. He's forced to publish.
When McDougall published his results, people kind of went crazy. A lot of people questioned his methodologies, but they couldn't really offer any alternatives to account for the 21 grams that were missing.
The Cullis consumptive home had been a lucky break for McDougall. No one else will give him a chance to continue his work.
When we use the term soul to refer to the principle or source of life in a living thing, then whatever is living is animated by a soul. Trees, grass, animals, all of it has soul and lives because of its soul. That broad usage of the term comes as a surprise to many people, but it is important to see that soul is what makes the thing to live.
I was at my parents' house and I was riding one of their mopeds. I turned a corner really fast and there was a squirrel sitting in the middle of the road. So in order for me to avoid hitting the squirrel, I made this huge right turn and I crashed into a tree. And I hit in such a way that I had to have the tendons on my right hand surgically reattached to the bone. So the day of the surgery comes, and I have never had a surgery before. So as they started to give me the anesthesia through my veins, I could feel it going through my body, up through my arms, into my shoulders, down through my neck, and then my chest, and then to my heart. In the very second that it hit my heart stopped. So the very second that I shut my eyes and died, I opened up my eyes and I was standing in the most beautiful, perfect marble building that I could ever imagine. And as far down as you could see, you couldn't see an end to this corridor. On the left-hand side were these beautiful, ornate doorways or tunnels that looked like they had been cut out of the marble. To the very right of those doorways, about 4 feet, there were these tables, and they each had 4 benches around the table so people could sit at each end of the table. During this whole process, there was somebody who was standing next to me, who was talking to me in my left ear. I never saw this person, but throughout my whole near-death experience, it was a guy who was standing next to me telling me what I was seeing and what I was looking at. He told me this was an orientation center. And I didn't think at the time anything about that I was having surgery or that I had an allergic reaction and that I had died. That didn't even occur to me. I was totally simply engrossed in what I was seeing. And so I just listened. There were people, 2 people sitting at each one of these tables, as far down as you could see. My guide told me to walk over and look inside the first tunnel. Inside the tunnel, I could see stars, and I could see planets, and I could see galaxies. It was absolutely a magical experience. That is a tunnel that people come through when they die. My guide then said, look up to your left and look at the next doorway. So I looked up to the next doorway, and there was a man that was coming through, and he had his right arm on his left chest. And my guide said he had died from having a heart attack. He looked very dazed. He looked very confused about what was going on. So the woman that was right in front of his doorway stood up. She walked over and she took his hands in hers. And she walked over and she sat him down across from her at this table. And I could see that she was talking to him, but I was too far away to see what she was actually saying. His appearance began to change. He was an 80-year-old man when he came through the doorway, but as he was talking to this counselor, he became younger and younger until he was probably in his late 20s or early 30s. Her job as an orientator was to help people remember that they have just finished a lifetime and that they're home now. And whether you want to call it heaven or you want to call it the other side, that's our true home. When she was done talking to him, he stood up. He walked over to the right of the table and he walked down 3 marble steps to a garden. And I know people have described the gardens on the other side that they're absolutely beautiful, but they are so hard to describe how beautiful they really are. The gardens were almost like they were alive. What was happening to this man is as he walked down those 3 steps and he walked into the garden, there were people there, a lot of people, and they were there to greet him from coming back from his life. They were hugging him, kissing him, welcoming him home, saying what a great job you did great, now you're back home again. And sometimes people don't need the orientation because they are much closer to the other side than others, especially kids. When kids cross over, they don't need to have an orientation because they just came from there. The orientation is for people who may have lived a long, long life and had forgotten where they really came from. And so that's where those counselors really come into play. And it was fantastic. I wish I could describe to you what it looked like. But as I looked down this corridor, there were people coming through the corridors, through these tunnels. It was very busy. People were crossing over all the time. And these counselors would get up and help them and bring them back to these tables and help get them orientated. So the building he took me to next was another Greco-Roman building with white columns, beautiful white Grecian Roman columns out front. And they were formed in a circle with a dome on top. Then we walked in. My guide said, this is where we plan our lifetimes. All of our lives go through a planning process, and we plan them with our main guides before we come into life, so that life it's not just a random accident. There's purpose, there's reason. When I first walked in, there was a table, and he was standing by it, and there were 2 scrolls on the table. One had a blue ribbon on it, and the other one had a red ribbon on it. And I didn't know what these were at first. My guide said, these are your scrolls that you write the major points of your lifetime on. Everybody writes down where they're going to live, what their parents are going to be like. Are they going to go to school? Are they going to go to college? What's their career going to be? Are they going to have a lot of money? Are they going to have a little bit of money? All of that is prepared ahead of time on these scrolls. Picked up the blue scroll, and I opened up the scroll on the table. And when I tried to read it, all of a sudden the scroll folded back up again. And my guide said, I'm not allowed to read that until I finish this lifetime. But he was trying to show me that our lives aren't an accident. Everything is actually planned out for a reason. He said we forget it because if we knew what we were supposed to do, we wouldn't be testing ourselves. He took me to a meadow, beautiful flowing mountains or hills, and all of a sudden I saw animals come jumping down that hill. And he said, every one of these animals that you've ever loved, or that anybody has ever loved, is on the other side. As I was standing there, I could see 2 of my dogs, and I could see 2 of my cats running down the hill. And all the animals play together until their loved ones from Earth cross over to the other side and come back and get them. It was such a feeling of unbelievable love that they're all there waiting for you, and that they play with each other, and that they're happy.
Many of you listening to this video have lost a pet at some point in your life. That experience was very traumatic for you, and you were deeply concerned that you would never see them again. Upon searching the scriptures, I believe I have a definitive answer that will settle any lingering doubts regarding the fate of your beloved companion. The following is what the Word of God has to say on this matter. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verses 19 and 20. For that which befalleth the sons of men befalleth beasts, even one thing befalleth them. As the one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they all have one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast. For all is vanity, all go into one place, and all are of the dust, and all return to dust again. This verse tells us that both man and animals have a spirit, which in this verse refers to it as breath. It also tells us that their eternal destiny is the same. They both go to one place. That's referring to the soul or the spirit. We know that the physical form does go back to the earth, and it does not go into infinity. But the Bible is a very spiritual book, and we're talking here about eternity. This one breath that both man and beast have goes into eternity, or as we would also refer to it, heaven. Job chapter 12 verse 10. In whose hand is the soul of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind. We see 2 things in this verse. Number 1, that every living thing has a soul. And number 2, that it differentiates between the soul of mankind and the soul of every living thing. That every living thing being sentient beings, animals. So we have man and we have animals. Both have souls. Both are in the hand of God. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 7. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Well, it makes sense that if the soul of every living thing is in the hand of God, and that the physical form goes into the earth upon their demise, that the spirit would return back to God. And that's exactly what this verse states. Every living thing includes animals. and their spirit does return to God. Psalm 36, verse 6. Thy righteousness is like the great mountains. Thy judgments are a great deep. O Lord, thou preservest man and beast. So we see from this verse that both man and animals are preserved into eternity. Their spirit goes on after their physical body ceases to exist. God preserves them eternally. A spirit cannot die. Luke chapter 3, verse 6. And all flesh shall see the salvation of God. Well, that's very conclusive. All flesh, of course, includes the animals. The salvation of God part of that verse is talking about going on after physical death. That there is a time, there is a place, and it is in the infinite realm where they will all be gathered once again. I don't believe that's the same salvation as being saved. Only those who are the elect, who actually are saved by God, receive his salvation. But I believe with animals, I think they're all saved because I really don't think they're capable of sin, conscious sin. Revelation 21:4. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. All right, we know that death is conclusive. And once a spirit enters into the eternal realm, there is no more death. So we can see that clearly their existence does not end with the cessation of physical life. This verse tells us former things pass away and that there is no more death. So if there's no more death, there can only be life. And that is exactly the fate of all living sentient forms of life, and that does include your pets, your animals. From the previous scriptural verses, it is therefore logical to conclude that the soul spirit of non-human creatures shall go into eternity.
And then the last thing that happened is my guide took me to this field. As I was standing there, another gentleman walked up. He was about 2 feet from me, and he was so bright that I couldn't see his face. All I could see was that he was wearing a white robe with a red sash around the waist. He lifted up his hands and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." The very second he said that, I woke up back in the hospital with these doctors all looking down at me. He said, "He's back, he's back." I was physically dead for 6 minutes. Yeah, and that's the crazy thing I don't understand is it felt like what he took me on was a 2-hour journey of the other side. How could he possibly have showed me all of those things in 6 minutes? It's so much a piece of my life now that I share with almost anybody who wants to hear about it, because that's what he told me.
Here is a haunting photo from Fatal Crash that appears to show a man's spirit leaving his body. Now, this picture was taken by a man, and it was on Facebook, and it was Saul Vasquez. Now, he gets credit for the picture. I'm not taking credit for it, but it was on Facebook, which is public. He didn't block anything. So here's the picture. Now, what I did is I took software and changed up the picture in different ways with contrast and color, brightness, etc., so you could see the soul. But this is a man's soul leaving his body. 100%. There is no question here. This isn't faked. This is the real deal. You have a soul, you have a spirit, and it will leave your body when you die, and you will go someplace. Now, where do you go? Some people say you'll go to heaven and you'll be reborn in another body. Some people say you stay in heaven. I don't know. But here is the picture. The caption in Facebook said that he took a picture from the cab of his truck and it was an accident between Campton and Stanton off the service road. And the news report reads like this: Stanton, Kentucky. It's Kentucky. A chilling photo taken at the scene of a fatal motorcycle crash in Kentucky is getting a lot of attention online. Now, this is a fatal crash. The poor guy died in a motorcycle crash. According to Lex 18 News, the crash occurred in Powell County, Kentucky, on Tuesday evening around 5:30 p.m. A motorcyclist was seriously injured after crashing on Highway 15 near Stanton, and he died at the scene. His soul left. Now, his body may have kept pumping blood on the transport to the hospital, but he was gone. His spirit left right there. There's the picture. So, Saul Vasquez of Mount Sterling, Kentucky, witnessed the photo, which is really weird. He witnessed that was written wrong, witnessed the accident while in his truck. He took the picture of the accident and then noticed something unusual about it. Zoom in and pay attention to the shadow just off the top of the state trooper hat, and you can see the spirit leaving the body. The photo has been shared thousands of times, and I'm making this video just to get it out there on my channel, and hopefully this will brighten all your spirits. Listen, you're not a bag of water. You're not just a bunch of flesh and water. It's not going to be darkness and blackness when you die. You're going to walk right out of your body, and you are a spirit, and that's the truth. There's so many NDEs out there, that near-death experiences, that will tell you all about it. Midnight in the Desert just had a doctor on that talked about NDEs. 4,000 NDEs to date that he talked about. That people talked about leaving their body and flying around, walking around, going on top rooftops, everything else. And this is a real deal. I've got a couple of personal experiences, not personal, but people that I know. My father was wounded on the battlefield in World War II, and he was pretty much dead. He probably died. He was hit by a Japanese mortar. It didn't hit him, but it went close to him, and he caught a lot of shrapnel in the back of his neck and his head. And he said he floated up above his body. He saw the whole battlefield. He looked down and saw his body and said, "What the heck?" He said, "I'm too young to die. I can't die yet." And he kept saying that, looking at the battlefield, and zoop, he went back into his body, and he woke up, and he was in horrible shape. He had a lot of shrapnel, and when the battle was over, he was transported to New Zealand to get patched up, and he obviously lived because I'm here. But there's one story. I have another story of a really good friend. He's in a big, serious band in Minneapolis, and he had a really bad asthma attack, and he pretty much died on the table. And he said he floated out of his body. He left the hospital. He went to somebody's, zoomed into somebody's living room, and he sat down on the couch, and he was watching television, and the dog saw him and looked at him and started barking at him, and the people were there, and they told the dog to be quiet. And the dog could see him, and he was a spirit. He was sitting there watching television, and he flew around, and somehow, he did this and that, and he zoomed back in to his body. And it's amazing, the stories. If you just ask around to people who they'll tell you if you ask them. But back to this picture. This picture is real. This is a spirit caught leaving the body. Share this with everyone. This is good news. This should take the sting and the sting out of death for everyone. You have a soul.
Even people born without a limb can feel a phantom.
The number was 25132. Now, the odds of guessing a 5-digit number like that in one try are enormous.
I want you to tell me which finger I'm touching.
Is it the ring finger?
Open your eyes and have a look. I won't move a muscle. When the person is experiencing that out of phase or discoincidence, where their hand is kind of mapping onto the rubber hand, that the actual physical temperature in their actual hand drops by about a degree or so, and which is a huge amount, right? And so
everything is backwards now. Like out there is the true world, and in here is the dream.